going to ask councillors for apologies. I have Councillor Robinson, Ria, I have Councillor Pahuruhuriwai on Zoom. I know Councillor Tibble is trying to get onto Zoom. Anyone else? If not, do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Parata, seconded by Councillor Foster. I'll give you an early warning. Turn your nameplates towards me. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Any declarations of interest? Not. Councillors, I take you to page 5, the declaration of our minutes. Confirmation of our minutes. So that is page 5. And I take you through to page 13, moved by Councillor Cranston, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Any questions or queries in regards to the minutes, page 5 to 13? If not, I put it to the floor. All in favour? Contrary, carried. I take you to our action sheet on page 14. Any questions or queries? I had one in regards to the article, last one, number biodiversity, farm environment plans, that had a date of the 16th of Jan to it.
Through you, Your Worship, apologies, the text didn't make it into your agenda. So obviously the deadline for submitting farm environment plans has passed. It's hard to give you an exact number of farms that now should have farm plans that don't. It's now a compliance issue. So the compliance team are taking sort of a risk-based approach to visiting those farms and identifying which should have farm plans, and then they will work through their normal compliance strategy to achieve compliance. We also have the new regulations coming on board later this year too, which will change the requirements for landowners.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Your Worship, just in terms of action 12.1, township upgrade. So there was a comprehensive November report and then an update again in December. There will be another update in the Chief Executive's activity report, and we will also provide you with a video of some of the work that's been done in the township plans, as well as you will be visiting them on your equi next week, some of the areas.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cranston.
Thank you. Item 14.2, the Wakahama Group. We're working with them, and it's good to see that the focus area is there with the removal of debris and all that overhanging trees, but also an issue that we were discussing was that we be supportive with the Wakahama facilities which are going up there, just to really ensure that we're being supportive and we're not imposing anything too much there. The facilities aren't mentioned in that. So.
Okay, no more questions or queries in regards to the action sheet. We have no leave of absence and acknowledgement and tribute. So you will be aware that a child died in our community yesterday evening. It's heartbreaking, and it's an unimaginable loss to that family. And on behalf of our community, I just want to extend our aroha and our love, and we will reach out to the whānau to see how best we can support them. Okay. Councillors, I ask before we move to invite our guest to the front, that someone move that we accept this late report. Moved by Councillor Gregory, seconded by Councillor Telfer. All in favour? Contrary, carried. So that is that we accept report 2324 into our agenda. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone here today. This has been a real community effort. We are here today to listen to you and to hear what you have to say and make a plan how we move forward together. So Manu, without further ado, I invite yourself. Hera, are you going to come to the front? And we will, so you know the process, we'll leave the microphone on. You can just talk around the microphone. Taina, Dewey, welcome. Make yourself home, the floor is yours. And then take this one. Here, right?
We've got a few comments. Oh, please. Right. How long we got? 2 minutes. Well, Morena whānau. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the council for making time for us. We're here on behalf of the 8,500 people who have signed our petition to date. How long's it been out there?
About a week.
Been about a week. And to be honest, we're gunning for 1,000, and we're really in hearts. It's really good for us to see the support and see people taking a bit of courage to support something, to support this kaupapa. Gee, you two, we really are in the shit, aren't we? Sorry, excuse my language, but we all know. And, you know, this has been impacting the whole of the Tairāwhiti for quite some time. And I'm talking about the impacts in particular of forestry / and sediment. It's getting into our waterways. To be honest, I don't understand why this is happening when really it can be dealt with at source, or a good chunk of it can be dealt with at source. But we're not here to play the blame game. And I really want to make that clear to the council and to our own. Here we're angry, particularly our communities, our people, very angry. Angry at ourselves, really, for letting it get this bad. For the complacency, being sold a sweet story, and choosing this. We could have been Silicon Valley, but we're not. We call our beach in Tolaga 90 Pile Beach. There it is. In these images you all are seeing, they're just a drop in the ocean of what's sitting out there in those catchments. That's sitting up on those hills, waiting as the earth moves, as we have these events, it ends up in our waterways, comes back down, comes down to us, not just in Nuawa. I want to make a particular acknowledgement to our whānau and tikapa. And I feel it's my relation over here. She's been having this battle a lot longer and you know, speaking for the whenua a lot longer than I have. Out of sight, out of mind. I feel for our whānau further north because the challenges are a lot more harder for us in Nuawa. We're all dealing with it. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And unfortunately, it's going to continue. This is the legacy that's been created for us, that's been created by us. And I just shake my head. It actually hurts, and it's actually quite traumatic for a person who, I'm born and bred in Nuawa. Both my parents born and bred there. Their parents born and bred on the coast. Their parents, their parents, their parents. It goes on and on and on. We are tangata whenua. And I'm not just talking about as Māori, Pākehā who have been here for generations, who are part of our community too. I consider them tangata whenua. They belong to the land just like us. But it's really sad that this is the legacy that we have, and this is the legacy that we're going to pass on to our kids and likely to their kids. Shame on us, just shame on all of us for letting it get to this place. We all are responsible. And so I really hope we can get out of the blame game. It's easy to blame. Yeah, we can get angry at each other, but we have to start a process of getting out of this mess. I brought these two along with me, and many of you here are familiar with both of these dead people. This is what here is Uncle Pat, or Dr. Pat to many, and it's good to see Haimona over there, and his son, and his mokopuna, and his wife down there, Auntie Ngaroma. And this is my mum, Ngā Huia. They were both advocates and courageous advocates for the well-being of our place and our people. They were courageous because no matter what they did or what hat they wore, those things were always at the forefront. The well-being of place, first and foremost, because that then translates into the well-being of people. I really hope there's a little, you know, these brainy people over here, they're great, the old brains trust. But Nadine, you in particular, Whanaunga, you're one of us first and foremost before that council hat goes on. And I really feel for you and your people because yeah, we've given you a bear shake and we've been doing that for a while now. But you belong to us and you belong to the lands that are being really impacted by this mess. And it's not God. When I see an act of God, boy, it makes me wild. It's us. We're responsible and we have to own that so we can start dealing with it. But these two people, very courageous. And I really take inspiration from them because no matter what, no matter what, there was no politicking. All that mattered was well-being of place, well-being of people. So thank you. I'm going to pass over to one of these clever people over here. Kia ora, Manu.
Yeah, so just on that, just a reminder that the majority, more than the majority, 80% of land in our rohe is erosion prone from moderate to very high in terms of its susceptibility to erosion. So there's only 20% that's not erosion prone. And just for your information, those that haven't delved deep into the National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forests, it's very clear in there that slash from harvesting, this is the wording taken from that document that's part of the RMA, slash from harvesting must be placed on stable ground. And if 80% of our region is not stable ground, how are we allowing it to even sit on the slope? And interesting too to hear the head of the president of New Zealand Forest Owners Association this week saying that he believes it should all be removed at source off the sites. It shouldn't be left on the hillsides. And he said it's not about the money, it's just about somewhere to put it. So if we can all put our heads together and find somewhere to put it and process it, sounds like the forestry industry are on board with that. Good on them. Just also draw your attention to this study that Mike Marden published last year, 2022. He's a real tohunga of researching this region and land use over many, many decades. And his studies go back a long way. But this one, he's just done an update and looked at the situation in terms of the number of eroding gullies in the rohe. And what he found was there's 1,864 gullies over nearly 5,500 hectares. But that's only 5% less than what it was in 1960 before we started all of this treatment. So things are not improving. All of the money that's been spent, all of the activity, things are not getting better on the land. And they go into a bit of detail around the situation. But basically they're saying that gully initiation, so gullies that are starting where there wasn't a gully before, and are expanding have outstripped those where we've tried to control them. So it is getting worse. It's not even staying the same. And they have some recommendations around what needs to be done. And basically they say it's going to be a lot more money to continue treating what's, you know, it's hardly working. We've got to put more resource into this and we've got to change the strategy, the remediation strategy for those erosion prone gullies. So we've got to relook at the rules. We've got to relook at what we're trying to do. Overlay 3A was supposed to solve the problem. It hasn't. and we've got to revise that whole strategy. And they also suggest we need to look at what we're putting on the land, and whether that's pasture or exotic or natives, we've got to put trees particularly that hold the land together in species that are going to do better than pine has. So this is science-based stuff. This is the evidence base, and this is just one report, but it's looking at it's gone from 1960 through to now. So really encourage people to have a look at that. It's online. The petition is here. This morning count was about 8,500 signatures, not all from Tairāwhiti, but a good proportion. And I did a quick check-up, and that's more than any of you got in terms of votes from last year, including the mayor. So, of course, not everyone in the country could vote for you. I'm sure they would, would have got some more. But four main requests, if we sort of break it down, the first was for this independent inquiry, and everybody's saying they think that's a good idea now. It sounds like even the Minister for Forestry has come around. The second was around the rules review. Council hasn't looked at its rules around land use since they were written in the 90s, and we think that's, well, it is well overdue, both legally and morally, needs to be rectified. The idea that the region, not just council, but the region could put itself forward to be part of the first tranche of this new RMA system that the government's introduced to replace the Resource Management Act. And there's opportunity for 3 regions to be part of that pilot tranche. And the fourth is around a just transition plan. If we're going to stop harvesting on the worst erosion prone land, we're probably also going to have to stop grazing on that land, because we put those trees there to stop the erosion that the grazing was contributing to. But that means there's forestry and farming jobs that are going to be displaced, and we've got to have a real plan to create new work around pest control for native forests or whatever it is. But we've got to have a plan. We've got to resource that plan. And places like Taranaki and Southland have that support from central government. We need to be advocating for that for this region if we're going to be, locking up a lot of that erosion-prone land and saying actually we can't do some of those things that we've had 100 years of doing on. So just on the inquiry, there's been a bit of chatter about it, and it's great to see federated farmers, forestry industry, the council backing it. What we really want to emphasise is that the communities affected and impacted by this situation need to be part of that inquiry. They need to have a representative on that panel. They need to help set the terms of reference. It's not about council or central government or the industry determining how they're going to be investigated. And we also need to have an opportunity for people to have their say into that inquiry. It's not just about looking at the science or the industry consents and so forth. It's about people having a say into that process. So we encourage council to ensure that that happens. And the process for that is the Governor General actually has to initiate it. Through an order in council under the Inquiries Act, the public inquiries set up in the terms of reference set there. But someone like the Minister for the Environment would be the right person to champion that and take it through Cabinet. Clicking. Next one's the review, and as I say, council's well overdue to review the rules. It can also review the consents, and as I understand it, the consents for harvesting and forestry haven't been reviewed since the NES for plantation forests came in 2018. So there's an opportunity for council, when there's adverse effects that weren't anticipated at the time the consent was granted, you can actually go back and change those consents. So you've got an opportunity to say, actually, guys, you're going to have to take that slash off the hillside. It's no longer permissible to leave it sitting in place. So council has that power under the Act. You just need to get on and review those consents. I know that's a process. There's other mechanisms where we could get an enforcement order from the Environment Court and say, actually, we're not even going to review the consents. You're going to be told from today, you're no longer permitted to do that. So there's a range of options, and we'd encourage you to have a look at those. We're keen to have a meeting to discuss them. As I said, yep, opportunity to get involved as a first tranche. The problem with all of this rule review is it takes a long time. So even if we get into the pilot group, it's still at least 7 years minimum if everything goes well before those rules will be, that plan will be updated and the rules can be changed. So that's way too long. If we've got 4 events in the last 12 months, that's 20 something, 8, 4. Yeah, so a lot of water to go under the bridge or logs to get stuck at the bridge if we don't move faster than that. And if we don't get in that first tranche, then it's even longer. So encourage you not to delay. And again, the Just Transition Plan, just a plea for people to be involved in that, the residents, the communities, not to leave it up to our regional leaders who have failed us. Obviously, we wouldn't be in this situation. There's no plan B at the moment for alternative industry. We need everybody to be involved, a participatory process for the community to determine and create those kind of industries and government support as well. But just don't leave the people out and leave it to the usual suspects to decide what that plan's going to involve. Likewise, with the first tranche or the new resource management scheme, there's a need for establishing a regional planning committee, and you can get on and do that whether or not we make it into that tranche. You can start setting up that committee with iwi hapu representation and other stakeholders if you decide they should be there, and that can be got on with now, and actually it has to be done before you're eligible to be considered for the first 3. So yeah, keen to have a meeting, keen to discuss what we can do about those existing consents. And also I think there's a real need to prioritise the support for whānau and communities and farmers to look at the risks that they currently face in the immediate term, to look at what's upstream, what's happened to date, and put some plans in place. Council has a climate change risk assessment process that doesn't get finalised till the end of next year at a regional level, let alone the whānau at Waipiro Bay whose house is about to get taken out in the next storm or whatever. We need support and resource at that level on individual properties. And I know there's farm environment plans, but as you've seen in your report, only a fraction of those have been handed in. There's a lot more that could be done if resources are allocated to supporting a team of people to be supporting those communities to make plans about their particular whare, their school, their property, their bridges and the roads that they rely on for access, get those assessments done so at least people can see where the risks are and get a plan in place for every community in the region. I think that's about us. So we'll do, I think someone wanted a photo op, so we'll do an official handover of the petition. Council staff did write a report that you guys will be debating after this, and you'll see, hopefully, I sent it at like 9 o'clock last night, our response to that report and some other sort of alternative recommendations that may be a little more specific than what the staff were able to, and appreciate they've been rushed and got a million other things to do. And you'll know if you allocate resource to any of this stuff, you're going to be taking away from something else, and you guys have to make those hard decisions about how to prioritise. So, good luck. Would you?
Just really quickly. Tēnā koutou. My formal role is as the corporate head of the Rongo Whakaata Iwi Trust. My actual role to be here today is in my role as mana whenua in Rongo Whakaata. And when I think about that whakapapa, I'm going to draw on Hine Tūpari Maunga, who is the maiden of the waters that flow from the mountains, Kamui Atane, and they had parawhenua mea, who are all the waters that are on the land. Parawhenua mea marries Kiwa, and they have the repo, the puaha, the wahapu. As Rongo Whakaata, we are a people of both the land and the sea, and we sit right in the middle. I want to acknowledge the wahingaro, that child that you spoke about, because that consequence comes upon our beaches as Rongo Whakaata. And we don't have a large forestry footprint, but we have a lot of rubbish that we have to sort out based on the policies. I'm here to support the petition, which has quite a strong East Coast flavour, but as a Tūranga tribe, I want to completely back the Brains Trust that that Hera talks about in Manu and this crew here, and support the push towards the recommendations. Tēnā koutou.
Oh, kia ora tātou. As you may or may not know, I actually I'm here representing the Waiapu catchment in the north. And I've been a researcher in the catchment for 20 plus years. The elephant in the room is climate change and climate change scenarios. Though that is something that we cannot change quickly, unlike these recommendations and this petition for the inquiry and so on. So I just wanted to point out that when I started researching in the year 2000, we looked at Bola as a 50-year event. So the prior major storm event had occurred in 1934. Last year, we had events occurring in a 9-month time frame, and now jump forward, we're in like 3-month timeframes for these catastrophic events. So there's much work to be done in council and in communities to create adaptation futures relating to climate change and mitigations. And that to me is really what this kaupapa sits around, is that adaptation futures that we really need to be real about. And I think I just want to thank everybody, and I know that everybody has their best intentions here at council, so it's now down to making the best decision. So kia ora tātou.
Try to keep the forestry industry in business by printing them.
I was thinking, wow, this is a lot of paper, but yes, it just shows us our community has spoken, and thank you for, I know all of this happened in the last week. We've all been busy with the response and a lot has happened. We've been on the ground just moving into recovery now. So I know you've been scrambling behind the scenes also to get all the information and recommendations ready. We are all ready to have discussions about how we do things differently. And it's time. We have seen this happen since I have been the mayor. This is the 6th extreme weather event we have had. We had 2 in 21, 3 in 22, and already in 23 in January, we have had 1. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for supporting us to collaborate, to work together, us not trying to put blame somewhere else or put responsibility onto somewhere else, but us as a community deciding how can we talk and walk together to leave a better legacy for our children up in Uawa and the whole of Kairawhiti. So I do want to acknowledge the anxiety, the angst, the anger also in regards to these events, because it affects when we can tally up all the money on our community, that's sometimes difficult to quantify. So I also want to acknowledge that emotional impact it has on our communities and on our town. So thank you very much. We will be having a discussion now. So our staff have been pulling together, also, we've only received this in the last day, pulling together some responses, what we can do, what we can't do, how we can make decisions now, but lots of investigation still going on. But we will discuss this now if you want to stay for that discussion. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Take pictures of-
Okay, councillors, so I'll take you to our late report 23-24 petition land use planning and regulations. As you can see, our staff have been working to see what can be accommodated, what still needs some work on, what can be done now, what needs to be done later. So this is an active discussion. We'll have input from Joe and Nadine as we move forward. I take this as read, and I will pass over to you, Joe and Nadine, to talk us through this. There might be some questions from the floor, and then we will move to our recommendations on the document page 2 of 60. Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship. So, yeah, as worship has said, take the report as read. It just takes you through some of the issues and the constraints, but also gives you an opportunity to consider what has been presented in the petition and give direction to us as to where you would like us to focus. Generally, I must also mention that we have Adam Hopkins online, our legal counsel, who has been working with us on the prosecutions and may be also able to answer any questions of a legal nature. But essentially it takes you through the work that's currently underway, the land use rules in terms of activities on steep and erosion prone land and how that fits in with the TRMP review, but also the wider work that's happening around the NESPF. And we've also attached our submissions to central government, first initially in, I think it was 2015, where we opposed the introduction of the NESPF. And then again, we've submitted a staff submission in 2022 requesting a fundamental review of the NESPF. We've also invited officials from MPI in that submission you will see to meet with officers and review some of the evidence once we are able to make that evidence available following an appeal period that might occur as a result of this last prosecution. We have outlined in there the request in terms of the first tranche for what is being called a pilot project. So all as part of the RMA reforms, and there's going to be a presentation on some of the issues that are associated with there is a plan for central government to have first, second and third tranches in terms of, so all regions will go through the tranche process. It's whether you're up front or whether you fit in that pipeline. We have been having discussions with MFE around what that might mean and how might we be able to navigate the substantive concerns that council may have about the RM bills in themselves and what that scope might look like. So we could, so that those conversations have been favourable in terms of making the scope clear to address any concerns that might arise out of the next conversation that you will have on the RMA. There is an outline in there in terms of the resourcing that have been increased by council over the period of time, and just point your just want to note that currently that we have 233 harvesting consents that are currently granted and not expired. So there's quite a large number of them that are there. But generally, in terms of the petition, the officers' report are supportive. We're on the same page in terms of what the community are looking for and what we want to see improved by way of environmental outcomes for our region.
Thank you for that. So councillors, do you have specific questions, or do you want me to walk through the recommendations and see where we all agree on, and we can just move on? And then you can ask the questions to a specific recommendation, or are these some, because what I read this and to me, it makes sense what is being recommended. I did ask our CEO more questions in regards to her discussion, and she had a phone call with MFE the CEO in the last few days. So that's active discussion happening as well. So is there any other questions or queries you might have before I walk through and see? I think we're all on the same page, but I don't know. Councillor Cranston, you go first, and then Councillor Foster.
Yeah, no, I think we are all on the same page, but I think what I want to discuss is what we can do outside of this. As Manu has pointed out, 7 years with what's happened in the short timeframes that we've been subjected to is an incredibly long period of time. And where we see a 20-year regional just transition plan, that's way too long, you know, way too long. So what can happen in that period of time? So I'm kind of sitting outside, totally support all the recommendations that are in front of us, but what can we actually do in the short term? And a lot of that may be on forestry. Manu spoke about the safe sites. That's something that should be happening as a very high priority work right now. And whether it's the forestry, whether it's us, or whether it's a combination, the identification of those safe sites and how we use them tomorrow, not in 7 years, not in 20 years, do that work now and get on top of that. We saw the photos of the terrible slash going on there, but what we didn't see and what we can't see because it's too silty is what's happening to the Kapiti Kai. You know, the damage that's being done out of sight under the water is huge as well, probably as huge as what we're seeing with the slash. So it is a priority work that we've got to consider. And my real concern is the timelines, is what's happened over 1 year, over 2 years, over 10 years, still sits outside of what can happen by taking this through its process that it does have to go through. So I think we do need to think about short term as well and what we can do. And I suggest that really putting in a lot of energy into those slash sites and the traps as well, the slash traps. You know, I'm sure more can be done on that. So support the recommendations, but want more.
I think through your worship, as Councillor Cranston has pointed out, it's it's actually our ability to be able to do something in the short term, and there is another party here that has a responsibility in the short term to address what they currently are doing in terms of the cleanup around the place. And then anything else, even slash catches, requires a long policy planning process to do that. So it is very difficult in terms of our ability as a council to be able to do a short-term fix. As you're aware, we currently do have a prosecution in front of the courts that will be heard in, I think it's February. So there's another mechanism by which we can deter. I did pick up on Mr. Caddy's point around an enforcement order, and I wonder if Mr. Hopkins, if he's online, Hopkinson, sorry, he could comment on our ability to do something in that space.
Adam, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, we might need to be tuned up.
Adam, if you can just speak up so that we can adjust the volume. You might have to check. Heather?
Have you gone unmute?
Yeah. What's that say then?
Adam, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right, so did you hear Nadine's question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Am I loud enough? Cool. Hey, I can't see you, but I can hear you, and hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, enforcement orders are definitely an option, and they can be used to address more complex issues. They can be used to address historic issues and prevent future issues. And they're also they're quite flexible. It's quite a flexible legal mechanism. So I do agree with Mr. Caddy that there is scope there, because one of the difficult issues we've got in this situation is that a lot of this slash, I think, is from historic harvesting. By historic, I mean more than 2 years old. And so those situations are a bit more difficult to deal with in terms of prosecution or abatement notices, but an enforcement order could be used to require forestry companies, particularly if they own the land, to remove residual slash and debris from properties.
So is that a recommendation? You get some wording ready for that. Thank you for that, Adam. I've got Councillor Foster, Councillor Wharehinga, Councillor Pahuruhuruwai, Councillor Parata.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the petition. You know, we're in dire straits at the moment, that's for sure, and we need some urgency on this. My question is that we've got recommendations here which I agree with, and also recommendations that Manu and his group have put through, and I just want to, and I agree with a lot of those, particularly community input into the inquiry at that when it comes to that stage. So, is there some way that we can integrate our recommendations with some of the ones that the group have incorporated?
Through your worship, so it was only reviewed this morning. We have not had enough time to consider what the implications are. I think there are some in there, just in terms of the consent review process as was being talked about, that's a bit of a red herring because consents are applied for and they last for about 5 to 10 years. So they're quite short in some senses. And by the time you've undertaken a whole review of a consent process, that harvesting will be well underway, and then you can appeal the decisions and processes. So that becomes a long, drawn out. So I think there are some issues that were raised that just on a quick squiz over the recommendations that have some issues that we would need to respond to and by way of process through a staff review. I think my advice to you is to focus on what we've got in front of us, consider what was heard from the petitions, and also we'll include the enforcement process as part of the recommendation as well.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing that is concerning is that the NES, which was put in 2018, does identify that slash should be removed from erosion-prone land, which has been identified 80% of our land. So, is there an opportunity that we haven't been monitoring as good as we could have done on that? Or, I mean, because this is the only tool we have at the moment, and I'd certainly like to have that reviewed. Thank you.
So through you, your worship, just on that point, that the NES isn't as quite clear cut as that. It says that slash must be placed on stable ground. It doesn't define what that is, or managed. And it's the managed part that is the bit that's open for discussion and debate and interpretation. And it's also the permitted baseline is that slash must be kept on stable land or managed. But then when you apply for a resource consent, you're applying for a resource consent because you can't meet that permitted standard, if you like.
Can I, through your worship, also respond to the monitoring component of the question? And so we have increased our resources in there. I've noted in the report we've increased it by 9 FTEs, and our officers have been actively investigating or assessing high-risk sites, and that is indicative in terms of the prosecutions that have been laid, unfortunately, but it is occurring.
Councillor Wharehinga, then Pahuruhuruwai, then Parata.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I did have a couple of few questions first, because we're talking about I guess the landscape where consents exist. I wanted to ask, what's our ability to be able to enforce compliance and clean up where consents don't exist on just on trees that exist on people's whenua? Do we have any ability to be able to immediate ability to be able to have conversations in regards to that?
Through you, Your Worship, it's probably a good one for Adam Hopkinson to answer. There is a general duty under the RMA to avoid, mitigate or remedy adverse effects, but he'd be best placed to advise you on the powers that we have in relation to those. It'll
be great, rather than getting Adam to respond, it'll be great if from the recommendation we have that as part of our the enforcement orders recommendation that will be coming through. It'd be great if we're able to pair that, if we feel that we can pair those together.
I don't, sorry, I feel like your question or comment was a lot broader than what we're looking at here. So if you're trying to capture every lot in terms of permittable activities that don't require consent, It's significant. Not
No,
quite clear
what
you mean.
I'm trying to, I'm sorry, for a term, what I'm trying to capture is that we've got a community group here, right? And we all agree that all of this woody debris that comes off down our catchments, you know, is a problem. What I'm trying to do is in our conversation is ensure that we're accounting for the breadth of where that woody debris is coming from. And some of those things are places where we have consents, right? You know, for that, some of these are probably already in established land blocks and things like that. There's problems with trees coming down our rivers. You know, if we focus on just this narrow part in regards to consents, then we're missing all of these other things. And that's my problem. That's my concern as a governor here, that we are tasked to make these decisions. And sometimes the decisions that we end up making are so narrow that we miss all of this other stuff. So really, it's just about trying to encapsulate, I guess, the spirit of the conversation, which we're having the spirit of this paper and the spirit of the community who have brought this petition. So it's more about that rather than trying to do everything across everything. It's more about this woody debris that comes down.
Through you, Your Worship, I think that would need to be considered as part of a broader piece of policy advice. And you'll see in the recommendations, we've tried to make them about land use, not specific to a sector or an activity, because there will be other land uses or unconsented land uses that are having impacts.
Can I?
Yes.
But I think it might be worthwhile if Mr. Hopkinson does comment in terms of the legalities around an enforcement order applying to non-consented areas.
Well, if you could speak, Mr. Hopkinson, to our ability to be able to enforce in those other areas that have trees that are ruining our rivers.
Yes, it's similar to the previous point I was discussing. I think enforcement orders are the appropriate mechanism because, as Ms. Noble pointed out, there is a general duty under the Resource Management Act to avoid adverse environmental impacts, and it is more complex when there is no active consent or there has never been a consent. But the focus of an enforcement order would normally in a situation like this be on the landowner, and there's always going to be a landowner, and they're always ultimately going to be legally responsible for managing the risks with their property and ensuring that nothing that's occurring on their property is causing adverse environmental effects on their property and on downstream properties. And I think enforcement orders are the broadest and best enforcement mechanism or legal option available to the council for addressing some of those more complex and broader issues.
Right, thank you, Mr. Hopkinson. That sounded like that's something we can do something about. Awesome, thank you. My next question is about our ability to be able to, I don't want to use the word pre-charge, but create a putia, you know, because this stuff is going to be continuing to happen, right? And there needs to be some kind of cleanup putia, because every time this happens, we don't have the funds or the ability to be able to, we have a lot of whānau in our region that have the ability to be able to clean up and all of these kinds of things. But in terms of funds, I personally think that that those that are responsible for the activity should pre-fund the cleanup and things like that, because it's inevitable that cleanup is going to need to happen. It shouldn't be leveraged on communities, and it shouldn't be leveraged on ratepayers all the time. Do we have the ability to be able to pre-charge the people that are responsible for the activities in order to be able to pre-fund cleanup?
So you go. Through your worship, I was going to talk about the consenting side of things. So there is the ability to require bonds for certain activities, but we would need to make sure that our planning provisions allow us to do that. So that might be a gap at the moment in the process. So that's when you ask for an amount of money upfront to cover potential cleanup costs or remediation costs. And then if you don't need to use that money, it's returned.
The ability to ongo bond, because the thing is, right, is that if like you say I'm renting a house and I have a bond, you know, and then I'm not a good caretaker of that house, I could exhaust that bond, you know, and there'll be nothing left of that bond. And then it's the people that own that river. You get the analogy I'm trying to make, right? So what's our ability to be able to on-go free charge in order for us to be able to clean up immediately.
So your woody debris policy is going to be bringing you back the policy position and all the mechanisms within which you can do that. So that's mentioned in your report, and we've committed to providing you that policy this, when, Michelle? Microphone.
Through your worship. So we are workshopping with councillors in February, and then there'll be a period of community engagement, stakeholder engagement, with the policy coming back around mid-year.
I'll have that conversation during the woody debris. Thank you very much for answering my questions. I guess the point is that our regulatory rules and our practice of yesteryear are inadequate. This is a conversation that I feel like we've been having since I first came onto council. You know, we've been saying to central government that we need these things, these tools, these legislative tools, in order to be able to actually have some power and some mana to be able to do these things on behalf of our community. We all know, especially those that have been in council, this is not the first time we've actually said, hey, central government, that decision you're making there is, well, you know, these kinds of things. You've written these in the you've written to those points in the attachments. You know, I guess my point is that everyone in our community you speak to all kind of agree on the things like right tree, right place, right land use, right location, right time, etc., etc. It's just in the doing of the things, though. You know, everyone will say the words, you know, on principle base. Yep, absolutely agree with this. But it's time we did something. The rules that we used and the practices that we've used yesterday, they're going to have to be different moving forward. You know, I applaud our community for coming and bringing this petition. There's nothing more powerful than the voice of the collective, you know. But it's a shame that it's had to come to this, you know, because we have been trying to have this conversation as a council, you know, for a long, long time. Absolutely support an independent inquiry, but I really implore those who are out there that will be in charge of that inquiry that it needs to have teeth. It can't be something that kind of lands in this conservative middle road dilution of reports of things, you know, like it needs to have some teeth. That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pahuru Huriwai.
Tēnā tātou, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, ka pai. O kaurau tai te kiti a koutou i te whānau e noho mai nā, I roto i te rima kaunihira, engari tēnei au ka mihi ki a koutou. E haere mai ta whiti, mai tata ki te whakaputa wa koutou whakaro, hera, manu, tui, teina, e mihi ana ki a koutou, e waha aina ngā kaupapa nui whakahirahira I te atanei. I'm just saying to councillors that I can't see the whānau there, but I just want to acknowledge them for the massive work that's gone on behind pulling this petition together and presenting to us today. And I want to employ our staff really to take on board the recommendations that have been presented to us today, to have a good look at it with urgency in terms of whether or not it aligns with our recommendations. You haven't had time to do that yet, but I would like to do that because personally, I'd like to actually just get on with it. It's been a long time the photos were, you know, told the story themselves this morning. And those of us who live up the coast see it every day. And this isn't the first council meeting where some of us around the table have expressed our huge concern and distress at what's happening with the environment. It's going to take a generation to change this, but we need to start today. I absolutely support the establishment of an independent inquiry and that there is community representation on that, and that the terms of reference also reflect that. I support what Councillor Wharehinga said about the rules, the review, those are urgent. They need to be reviewed. I don't want to be sitting here in another 12 months, having been for another 4 events, and we haven't listened to the community. So it's a huge take, but like every journey, it starts today. And I came into the council on the Māori ward to help to bring voice to the concerns of our community, particularly Māori. And when I came into here, ko te tiriti o Waitangi, te tuatahi, te tuarua, me te tuatoru. Equity, access, all of those things that we've talked about as a council in our induction, the things that we want to do better with tangata whenua and our communities impacted by, yes, inherited issues. But that's all I wanted to say, was that we need to start today and and engage our community more, bring them on board. I've been listening to stories of from whānau up and down the coast, they want to do something, and there's a disconnect between LORE and LAW, and we get hamstrung with the LAW and our LORE, our tikanga, and the things that are inherently what we need to do and want to do as a community is tied up in red tape. And I absolutely understand the difficult situation that our CEO is in and the team, but we have to do better. Ka nui tēnā mōku. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parata. Not working. Oh, there we go.
Tēnā rā tātou. E tangi ana te ngākau. E tangi ana te ngākau ki o tātou whenua, ki o tātou awa, ki ngā waitipua o te haukainga, e te whānau e mihi ana. It's quite clear from this conversation that we're not actually having a debate. It seems that we all agree that this is an issue. And this is like Councillor Wharehinga has said, this is not the first conversation we've had about forestry. And Manu rightly pointed out that our regional leadership have been having this conversation for what feels like many years. So I just wanted to acknowledge the devastation, particularly on the East Coast. And I understand also how complicated this conversation is in terms of land use, in terms of erosion, in terms of whose responsibility is it to clean up. And in terms of the very complicated relationship that we have with forestry, in that it employs our people as much as it ruins our riverways and sometimes kills our men. It's a very, very complicated, heartbreaking relationship that we have with forestry. And at this point, it's feeling exploitative. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. My question actually has to do with Manu's email in regards to the individual level risk assessments and the acknowledgement about the farm environmental plans. I think at this point it's important that while we all agree about the things that need to be done for forestry, for industry, for resource management, consents, I think it's also really important at this point to protect people and to protect their homes and the things that they've built. Living up the coast for us is it's a deliberate choice because it would be easier to live elsewhere. The road makes it difficult for us, the access to services makes it difficult for us, but if we choose to live there, it is a struggle to build up everything that we have. And at this point, I think that that's a conversation that I would implore our council staff to look at how we might help whānau develop plans, to look at assessing risk in their property and how they might be able to be safer. That I think that should be done at a community level, but also at an individual level for homes and properties that we know are at higher risk. Thank you.
Councillor Alder.
Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome whānau. We can debate, we can form committees, we can get experts to make opinions. We all know what the answer is. Permanent, native, on the steep stuff, restricted areas for harvestable forest, and let's keep the good land for sheep and cattle, because that is good for us. The answer is actually quite simple, and it glares us all every day we come to a meeting and open the minutes, and it states terms of reference right at the top. The council's terms of reference include the following powers which cannot be delegated. Number one power is the power to make a rate. If through incentivized rating, zero rating for native forest on steep slopes, and heavy rating for the areas we do not want pine, we can, from tomorrow, with the moment we bring in the rates, we can start influencing the long-term decisions of the forestry industry. Is this not possible?
No.
So we don't have the power?
You do have the power to make a rate, you do have the power to change that rate, but you have to go through a consultation process in order to do that, which takes time.
We have time.
And that will be part of the 10-year
And the
plan
workshop
discussion.
that's going to happen in February.
Yes. Okay, councillor Tupara and then councillor Gregory. and then we'll
Wouldn't
wrap
you,
up.
Worship, and my apologies for dressing rather down today. Obviously, I missed the memo. I did contemplate wearing a jacket, but I went outside onto my veranda and it was so hot and sunny. I thought, sure. And then I come into this and everybody's got a jacket on. Hey, I stand to me, to our whānau who came in today, our community who come in today, and I'm disappointed that they have to come. They didn't really need to because we could see this for ourselves, but they came anyway to reinforce it. And as a first-time councillor, I'm probably going to get things wrong.
That's all right.
So I'm asking for some grace at this end
That's
of the
good.
room. I don't think we should be consenting the practice of forestry. I think we should stop consenting that practice. That practice, it appears from our mōhio's that know this stuff, something that came up through the 50s and the 60s to stabilise the whenua. There was an experiment that didn't work. We don't need to have consultants and time to realise that. And we got it wrong in my grandfather's time. And they had hoped that they would do that because they were going to be good custodians of the whenua. And they just simply got it wrong. And we have suffered that experiment up to today. We have lost life. Forestry has taken our lives. Sometime today, I'm responding to an issue at the port to create a piece of art as a memorial for young Shannon Rangiona, who lost their life. Then all I can do is a piece of art to acknowledge him. And I've got to figure out how the process of that. She's been gone for just nearly 3 years now. And we just don't have time. We didn't have time when we lost Denise. Erica Jones coming home from kapahaka practice in a truckatu. We didn't have time then. And there have been many before her, and there will be others tomorrow. The small boy yesterday. I remember those games, playing in the slash, running around on the sand dunes. Yeah, I remember that stuff. And this is me as a first-time councillor getting things a bit wrong.
That's all right.
And that stuff hits at home that we do not have time. The stuff that money brought forward needs to go into our recommendations. And my question is, can we hold off those recommendations until we've had time to marry these words to the words we have? I know I'm probably breaking all sorts of legal direction on this, but the consents that we already have, how can we take them back? How can we retrieve those consents? How can we rein them in? Because the consent holders have not kept up to their promise to our community. One of the photos in the presentation from the whānau this morning was from 2018, my mate Mark Kultua's house at Mangatukero. 2018 at Mangatukero happened just yesterday. Happened all over again. And I remember going to his house and going, we had to climb over the slash and it was 3 times the height of the ceiling to get to his whare, to retrieve family photos and treasures. And it got to a point when I said to the boys, bro, we are, it's just too dangerous. But we wanted to respond to that. That's what Councillor Prata is saying. Councillor Wharehinga is saying, how can we respond? Let us respond because we just have to. We will put our lives at risk to do that. But health and safety regulations deny us that. Costs and resources deny us that. We've got to be better than that because the community is saying, let me go to help. And I'm not talking about our big public beaches. I'm talking about the homes along the rivers where we used to go eeling up Mangatukero Valley. We used to go pig hunting. And I remember when we went to his house, the pile of pigs that had been washed up, we couldn't believe it. Bro, look at the waste of the meat. And then the flies, and there was crawling through. There isn't time with this. We've already had an event, and it's only January. We haven't even had winter. We will have 10 events this year. We just simply don't have the time. And I want to ask, can we stop giving our consents to forestry? Can we take back consent from forestry? The legal eagles probably go, nah, we can't. But I want it to be known that that's the way we feel. And we will be denied, and we'll keep being denied, and our community out there will want to come in. And I don't want them to. And most of them that are in here, they're in town. Mark Hooper lives in town because you can't even drive up his road. And even if you could drive up his road, you can't get up the driveway into his house. So he has to live in town. All of that does not give us the luxury to take 5 to 7 years for consents, lifetime, or 20 years for a turnaround of a just way of amending this. This needs to start now. And so my question is, are we able to hold off making a decision on these recommendations till at least these recommendations have been worded in a manner that can fit with that? And that at least is our start. Kia ora.
I'm just going to ask our CEO to respond to questions raised, queries raised, what can be done, what can't be done. And then we'll take it from there and we'll go through the recommendations. Thank you, Nadine.
So that is in terms of the recommendations that were presented by Mr. Caddy last night.
I think they were emailed last night.
So just in terms of process, the recommendations do not form part of the staff report. They are new items that have come in via public deputation. There are, in the recommendations that you have to council, some of the recommendations that were emailed are basically reinforcing a view where, for example, we've got gives direction to staff. It's saying, you know, essentially go and do it. So that's already, some of those are already covered anyway, depending on, I think I know where you're going to go anyway, with directing us what to do next. There are other bits in the petition that actually require more work and that we may not necessarily agree with being the right way to go about achieving the same outcome. So in terms of the risk assessment and allocating resources to do that and then prioritisation around that, we would want to come back. In terms of the consent reviewing, we will want to come back to you with more information to make an informed decision about what that might mean and what the outcomes it might achieve. I think in terms of what has been presented by way of the levers that council can influence, and let's be clear around the levers we can influence and where we need to lean heavily into others to do their part as well, is around the policy plan making, is around the enforcement order, which addresses some of the short-term concerns, our monitoring and enforcement activities that are currently underway, conversation with MFE around the tranche 1 and what that scope of work might do, recognising that that's still going to be a long piece of time, work that's happening underway in terms of who pays for what and how they pay for that in the woody debris space.
So can I ask, I haven't had time, I quickly skimmed it at 5 a.m. this morning, so I haven't had time to look at recommendations that was proposed. Can we pass and add our enforcement order, but also maybe add something, staff, because it's new, the information that was given today or proposed recommendations, ask staff to properly analyse the recommendations made and get back to council?
Yes, I'll propose a number 8 once you've done your addition.
Okay, councillors, I'm going to move through these recommendations. I don't want people to take on the job of wordsmithing. Councillor Gregory, yes, please. I forgot, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to firstly ask a question just relating to the TRMP work that on point 21 here, it says that work on sustainable land use is already underway as part of the review. Just a question, like, how long would it be before that work is completed and that is a reality?
So through you, your worship, under the current timeframes, we have got the bulk of that work reaching reality, if you like, in phase 2. So from 2025 onwards, the choice you have to make is whether you direct Nadine as CEO to direct staff to bring that forward into phase 1, which means we're looking at engagement and consultation on a proposed change of rules and policies this year, and then public notification and the formal process next year.
So during the last training, we were focusing on housing, and that was a priority, and that's what you guys were asked to speed that through. Does that mean that we stop that and do that, or?
We'll have to reprioritise once staff come back to us. And was it in 2 weeks' time? Was it, did I just dream about the 2 weeks? We will have to reprioritise. At the end of the day, Joe will come back, but we can direct, but something else will then move out. But it's for us to decide. This is an issue in our community now, and I personally would like us to move that in there. So yes, we will be.
Yeah, so those are the things we have to juggle, along with the freshwater provisions that we have to notify in 2024 as well.
Okay. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful for these people that came here today and brought this and presented it so succinctly and with some fantastic action ideas. And it kind of makes it easy for us when you hear what they presented. And I support Councillor Parata's comments also regarding the complexity with, 1 in 4 people in our region who rely on that industry for income. And also lastly, I just wanted to say that we're going to try hard and we're going to do everything we can, but this isn't an overnight fix, and we're going to see this again. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to talk us through the recommendations one by one. And like I'm saying, this is a report that was done in the last few days by staff, and I'm really grateful for the mahi that's gone in behind the scenes, Nadine. Thank you for that. So it is not going to be perfect. And we are going to add a number 8, which I can't read Nadine's handwriting, so she'll have to read number 8, but reaffirms our support for the independent inquiry. And we do want to make sure there that community is involved and it's independent. Number 2 is just a note about the NES PF, that's just note. Then number 3 changed to investigate inclusion. So we delete the bit, investigate inclusion of a review of land use rules. Number 4 is just noting again, staff just letting us know that they are chatting with the MFE. Number 5, continue discussion with MFE, whether to explore Tairāwhiti as being the model region. Yep. Other recommendations to words? I'm trying not to be too big of a wordsmith. If you can, please contribute, because we're trying to tidy it up as much as possible.
I would just amend it to direct staff to explore Tairāwhiti being a model region.
Yes, people already were happy with that. Then number 6 is again just noting. Then everyone needs to listen. We're adding a 7 and an 8. 7 words says directs staff to apply for an enforcement order to require removal of residual slash and woody debris and any other remediation required. That's number 6. Number 7. And number 8 is direct staff to report back to council on the recommendations submitted by Te Manatau Tairāwhiti responses to the staff report. Kapai, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Wharehinga. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Oh, Ani, I'm too late with with urgency, Ani adds. Thank you for that, Ani. I'm not good on the cell phone today, communicating with our Zoom participants. Thanks again for joining us today. We ask that you join us for a cup of tea. We're just going to have a short break. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving to our agenda proper, so you can put your okay, councillors, we go straight to page 16. So as you will see of today's agenda, which was really information dense, I'm sure everyone else's brains are on fire after reading this. I just want to, before we start on anything, acknowledge Jo and her team for, I know the timing, and I also want to acknowledge, thank you, asking for extensions to most of these, the 19th of February. All these submission times come out and it's over Christmas time or when people take a break. So I want to acknowledge you and your team. Nadine, if you can extend the thanks to them for the massive amount of work. And when I read through that, I was just again reminded of all the clever people that work at council and know the legislation inside and out and can guide us in the right direction. Thank you for that. So councillors, we are going to move to one of our topics, which we have discussed ad nauseum before. Gisborne District Council feedback on proposed changes to Class 4 gambling licensing system. I'm going to open Jo if you do want to make a few comments.
So through your worship, just to, I guess, highlight, Class 4 gambling relates to pokie machines. That's what we're talking about here. The consultation that the Department of Internal Affairs has released is really about changes to the licensing system, which is not something we administer, but we've taken the opportunity to provide some feedback about what we think is not working as the system as a whole, in line with the direction that the previous council gave us when we were reviewing and updating our gambling policy. So it's quite a short piece of feedback, but we just want to take every opportunity we have to flag with central government the concerns that we, or the council, has with gambling and the impact it has on our communities.
So for our new councillors, you will, from this paper, also see something that all of us have shared in the past, is that the legislation have no teeth. It doesn't work for our community. It is, it really needs a massive overhaul, because we have no powers really. It's not really a community voice. So what Jo is proposing in her submission is to say the whole thing needs a good shake up. So I'm sure all councillors would agree with that. I'm going to open it for discussions if anyone wanted to. Otherwise, I'll ask for a mover. Councillor Gregory, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if we know why there is no gambling support person here, and whether or not telling the DIA about it is going to make any difference. Maybe I would have thought maybe it's a Ministry of Health job that is.
So through you, your worship, yes, it is a Ministry of Health responsibility. It's just really flagging how the system isn't working well for Tairāwhiti. That's the reason the point is made. I understand, I think there is some online support available for Tairāwhiti for those with gambling addiction problems, but it's the face-to-face that's missing. I think they have been working to try and resolve that.
Because the funding was stopped, hey Jo? The funding for that person was stopped.
No, I believe it's trying. I don't really want to speak for the health system, but I think that, like we have issues with recruitment and retention and getting people to place.
It's just astounding to read that the Community Trust declined a application and said it was because we wanted tougher restrictions on our gambling system. I just find that astounding. Thank you.
Well, do I have a mover, or is it Councillor Cranston?
Just a quick one. I just wonder whether there's any work being done on replacement for this, because the thing that's holding up us really being restrictive and really pulling this down, the harmful impacts of these gaming machines and that, is that so many organisations, and I'm involved with 3 of them, are actually quite dependent. We're actually quite dependent on the money that comes through. So I think there needs to be work to get us on board, or the organisations that are dependent. What can we replace it with if we do get really staunch on this and get into it?
Councillor Parata.
I just actually wanted to support what my fellow councillors have said, but also commend council and staff with this feedback, knowing actually that it isn't a policy that we can do much about, but the response from this piece of advice and from this paper shows that we're responding to the concerns of the community, and the community is concerned. So I come from a community where we have a gambling problem, and lots of people that do gamble that have absolutely no business gambling, and they're being exploited. And I know that there's limitations to what we can do, but I just wanted to commend council in that way and in support of our community. And then also the same as what Councillor Cranston is saying, is that there are lots of ways in which the money makes its way back into the community, but there must be another way that is not causing addiction and pain in our communities, that will fund the good that happens in our communities. Thank you.
Anyone else that want? Councillor Thompson, welcome.
Yeah, just on that, so it probably already been said with Debbie. Yeah, there's just the dollars for the staff. I was just wanting to chase that up and wondering why that staff wasn't in place when the money was there. I will also make note, I read that there's less machines now, but our gambling's gone up by about 50%, even though we have reduced the machines. So it's sort of showing that, yeah, we're reducing the machines, but our gambling's still going up despite that. That's about it.
Anything else? Moved by Councillor Gregory, seconded by Councillor Parata. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you for that. We move to our next, which is also very straightforward, our temporary alcohol ban. So you will see from this that the police apply to us for certain areas like they do with R&V. This one they applied for, but it worked because of COVID, didn't go ahead. So they're just asking this time around, give them the power to stop people using alcohol in certain areas. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I'm happy to move this paper. It's same as the previous paper, but just a different date. So no problem to me.
Good. Seconded by Councillor Wharehinga. If there's no more discussion around this, let me just check my text because I have a councillor. No, she didn't text me. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. I'm usually quite good with the texting. I'm letting it down today. Okay, now we move into the meaty stuff, councillors. These are massive changes coming for our region, for our country, the Resource Management Act stuff, as well as the Three Waters stuff. So, Paula, welcome. Joe, will you open this up for us?
Yes, we have prepared a presentation to go through. It's both a recap of the reforms, and I can whiz through that if you're all familiar with them from your induction and from reading the paper, and then we'll just go through each of the key points so you can give us your feedback and whether you agree, disagree, or what we've missed. So Paula has done a lot of the hard work. This is Paula Hansen, one of our senior policy advisors. It's a huge amount of detail. So we've tried to keep it high level and focus on those key implications rather than going clause by clause, which I expect you'll appreciate. So just let's see if this is working. Yes, just a recap. So some of this hopefully will be familiar to you from your induction, but I know you received a lot of information during that process. So you may just appreciate a quick recap. Central government drivers for reform. So they're up there. I think we all know these and would probably all agree with them. We've got complex and lengthy processes, which we've just been discussing previously. The environment's not receiving enough protection. not keeping up with population growth, interests of hapu iwi Māori not adequately recognised and provided for, climate change impacts need to be considered properly in the system. And there's also this matter of cumulative effects not being particularly well managed at the moment. And then the issues lastly there about allocation. We've had the first in, first served approach, which doesn't necessarily lead to efficient or equitable outcomes. So just a brief overview there. And then the reform objectives are up there as well. So 5 key objectives. Again, these are supported by staff. We support those reform objectives. I guess the question that we and others in the sector have is whether the reforms will achieve these objectives or are the most appropriate way of achieving those objectives. Particularly that one in grey about improving system efficiency and effectiveness, reducing complexity, whilst retaining appropriate local democratic input. So that's a key theme you'll see coming through the submission points. And then there's, within the legislation itself, there's some specific outcome statements or some outcomes sought. And again, it's about reducing the number of plans. There's a key change away from an effects-based system, which we operate under the Resource Management Act, to a more outcomes-based focus. Simplifying standard site. There's lots of good words about the outcomes sought. So I guess in summary, the question is whether the reforms will get us there or not. So what the system looks like. So there will be 3 new acts. At the moment, 2 pieces of legislation have been introduced into Parliament. So that's the Natural and Built Environment Act bill, or the bill, and that's where a lot of the detail is. And that will be the primary replacement for the current Resource Management Act. And if you have opened up the legislation and you're familiar with the existing legislation, you'll see that lots of provisions have been carried over, tweaked slightly. And then we also have the Strategic Planning Act. That's much less detail, much shorter. It introduces this regional spatial plan, regional spatial strategy, and that could be a really useful tool, provided we have some certainty about what's covered, certainty around implementation and accountability around implementation. At the moment, the concern is that a lot of it ties back again to councils, where we really need central government and others to come to the table as well with strong commitments. So the intention of that regional spatial strategy really is that it sits at the centre of everything and will integrate planning decisions across different pieces of legislation with the national planning framework, the national direction, and then feed directly into our Natural and Built Environment Act plan. So that's the regional spatial strategy looks 30 years out, or at least 30 years out. You can go further if you wish. And it's when you have your regional planning committee, you also have a central government representative appointed to that committee. And then the Natural and Built Environment Act plan, these are more similar to your Resource Management Act plans that we have at the moment. So our Tairawhiti Resource Management Plan would eventually be replaced by an MBE plan or an MBA plan. The acronyms are still changing, and it has sort of similar purpose, similar look and feel to the TRMP. And then we have a national planning framework. This will be where all the national direction is pulled together into one place. They're also looking, so at the moment it says there are 23 pieces of national direction. The idea is that these will all be coordinated and integrated within this national planning framework, and that also new provisions will be added. We're still a little bit uncertain about what's going to be added in the first iteration of the national planning framework, but definitely some provisions around infrastructure, climate change, natural hazard risk management, and there may be others to be added to that list as well. In terms of development of that national planning framework, Ministry for the Environment has started work, but it is going to be a 2-year process. So we're not likely to have a final document until 2025 at the earliest. And it will go through a board of inquiry process in terms of submission and feedback. And the minister will make a decision on the final look of the national planning framework. These are some interesting diagrams. These attempt to set out the difference between the status quo, so how accountability in particular looks like under the Resource Management Act, and then what will happen when we switch to the new system. So the real message to take from this status quo picture is that there are clear lines of accountability. It runs through the system, and that's what that golden dashed line is, if you can see it. Obviously, we're a unitary, so we do both the regional council and the district council functions. And in terms of that top piece where the red arrows are, we need to give effect to national instruments. And then we have this regional policy statement that's your strategic high-level document, and everything has to give effect to that, whether it be a regional plan or a district plan. So there's quite a strong hierarchy there and strong direction. And then we move to what is proposed under the new system. And you'll see that the accountability has sort of been separated. You've got your regional planning committee making decisions about what your policy framework's going to be. And then you have the councils, or us being the one council in the region, left with the accountability and the responsibility to deliver. There's also a weakening of considerations, particularly for the environment. So we can do a statement of environmental outcomes, but the MBA plan, the National Built Environment Act plan, they only have to have regard to those when they're developing that plan. They don't have to give effect to those environmental and social outcomes that the council thinks are important for its community and its place. So moving on to our submission points. So we've gone through in the same order that they're presented in the paper. So we started off with just a brief list of things that as staff we generally support and that we heard support for from council in earlier conversations. So this is around page 49 and 50 of your agenda if you're working through that. So is there anything there that we've listed that you don't support or that we've missed that you think should be included?
Councillor Cranston, thank you.
As we're on that slide, just a little bit of concern around the prohibition of insurance for fines and infringement. I mean, the go-to for a lot of organisations when they can't afford a fine is to declare bankruptcy or something, so that, you know, then we're left last cab off the rank, if you like. So the rationale around the prohibition of insurance for fines and infringements?
So really the rationale is it tends to be those larger companies that have insurance for statutory non-compliance. So really, when they do receive what looks like a fairly large fine for an RMA breach, it's not actually hurting them to the extent that we think it may be because they're insured.
But what happens if they're not insured? We haven't got that money.
Well, that's probably no change from the status quo, because it will be the smaller, less profitable organisations that don't have insurance anyway.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Councillor Tupara.
Just a question around whether or not, and it may well be somewhere clearly defined, and that is the definition for what an iwi is and what mana whenua is. Is that two different things or the same thing? And what they are basing the definition for those terms on?
Paula.
Yeah, I believe there are definitions proposed within the legislation. So I'm happy to point you in the right direction and receive any detailed feedback on whether those definitions, interpretations are correct.
Thank you for that. Because in our rohe, there are a lot of folk that define themselves as iwi, but perhaps possibly don't have a formal framework around which that iwi is recognised. And that'll probably be the case for some years to come, given that our settlement process is still happening. And it would be useful to know why they're using the term iwi on one hand and why they switched to mana whenua as well. And whether or not there can be an opportunity for some consistency, and therefore then some consistency around defining what that looks like.
Thank you.
Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I broadly agree with with staff's staff's feedback in regards to these things, particularly the parts around the dilution of accountability of this governance table to our community in regards to some of these things. I mean, we literally just had a petition this morning about forestry / and consents, which is a regional issue, you know, and if there's a regional rōpū, which is kind of at arm's length, then that creates another arm's length away for our community to be able to engage. So I just broadly support the entirety, but really support those parts. I'm happy if staff want to strengthen those parts.
Councillor Parata.
I too support that, and I thought that the information that we received as part of the agenda was excellent and very informative. In my notes that I wrote after reading it, it says here, quote this, so I'm going to for the table. Transformation of this type proposed by government requires transformational funding. And considering that we're a unitary authority, they need to consider that, and considering also our issues as Councillor Wharehunga has said around resource consents and resource management, I think that this is a bigger conversation and we need to push harder to central government to allow us to be able to make this kind of transformation for our region, and just wanted to acknowledge and support staff for the recommendations in the report.
Councillor Foster.
Just a quick perusing of this. I'm not quick, but I did go through it quite a lot, and I'm just thinking there's a lot of stuff in here that is actually taking the local input out. You know, these regional policy committees is like, that's actually quite a scary consequence of what is trying to be achieved here. And I would have thought a region like us in particular, we want to have more local input than ever. So when you've got a minister coming in and he's appointing people in a regional planning committee, and there's only a little bit of council involvement, there's alarm bells ringing big time. So you know, I'm assuming that minister is going to be doing everything around the country and looking after all the regional planning committees in the country. So what kind of local input, and how does he acquire that local input that is required for us to get the right outcomes from this? Because, you know, the regional planning committee has got so much power from a director be able to be appointed and then appoint people under him. You know, what's the process? It's not democratic. What's shoulder tapping? I mean, you know, this is something we were trying to get rid of, not promote. So yeah, I agree with all the consequences and the submissions that you're doing, but you know, I'm just looking at this, and who in their right mind would have actually promoted some of this for the country? You know, there's some huge questions here about where the intent is at the end, and it's not about local control, it's about central control, and that's scary.
So through you, Your Worship, just to clarify the appointment process for the Regional Planning Committee. So it is the council that appoints the regional members, and then the Māori appointing body or bodies for the region appoint the Māori representatives, and then the minister appoints the central government representative for the regional spatial strategy. So there is still some control on who gets appointed. The independent hearing panels are different. That is totally independent, and that's an Environment Court judge that will be appointed to run that process. But yeah, they are good questions about how you as a council will decide who to appoint and how, and then similarly for the Māori appointing bodies or bodies, there's quite a lot to work through there for the region. Yeah, and the numbers, so we have to have at least one person appointed on behalf of our council, but you have to have at least 6 members on the council, but there is no upper limit. So theoretically, you could appoint all of you.
I'm just going to ask people that haven't spoken. You can be lucky because I haven't taken notes. Councillor Telfer, and then we'll go back to people that want to say a little bit more. Just your microphone. Microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, look, it's been really interesting listening to this whole thing, and I think I don't want to deviate off what we're actually doing now, but there's a few things out of this one I just wanted to say. One thing I read in here was page 60 was around on the summary of potential submissions was the reformers may not streamline or reduce bureaucracy around the consenting parts of the system. Now, I would have thought that one of the biggest drivers of this whole reform was to reduce bureaucracy around consenting parts, because that's probably one of the biggest frustrations. It doesn't matter who you run into in what industry, whether it's private people getting things done for themselves or whether it's companies. So I find that quite alarming, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we should, as a council, should really try and push going forward. Look, the other part was we actually had some workshops with the workshops we had with the people that came and spoke to us about this resource management reforms and the Local Government Act reforms. And the one thing I took out of both of those workshops, unless I read that wrong, was out of both of those came that we as a unitary authority are going to be able to make rules for our own catchments in our own areas and take more or less take ownership of it and not being dictated from the central government. And what we've seen today, I take the hat off to this group who brought this petition, and I don't think anybody disagrees. I've had meetings with the Forestry Council, I've had meeting with the head guy from Auckland, the Burnslaw. They all agree we need it. So I don't think there's anybody in our community that's disagreeing with that, but it's had to come to this to actually do. So I look at that and go, well, hang on a minute, why don't we actually show some real leadership and start to say we are going to take ownership for our own district? And I know there's ramifications, and I know people will say we can't step on individual property rights. No, we can't, but we can actually send a directive to people that want to come into our area and own this land. And if you only look at the forestry side of it, I don't think there's a forest, hardly a forest up here that's owned by New Zealanders, other than Roger Dickey, who is a shareholding type scenario. And so we are being dictated by people that don't live here, that don't see the consequences of the decisions that that are made in our area. They don't have to deal with it 30 years down the track, and we do. So I think, I'm all for putting a moratorium on any more planting in our area until we can sit down around the table, and we've got to be very, very careful that we do not start blaming the forestry. Forestry is a big part of our community. There's so many people's livelihoods.
We just need to stick to what we're discussing right now is the bill. So
Yeah, okay.
just steer clear. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. That's the main thing, I think, just around streamlining that consenting process.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cranston and someone else had their hand up. Councillor Tupara.
Yeah, thanks. Page 48, second bullet point, reduce costs for people, including infrastructure providers, home builders and owners and developers. That's great. We've heard a lot in that area for a while, but the funding model could have risk to GDC. And by that, I mean the ratepayer. We see that there's a big focus on strengthening compliance, monitoring and enforcement, and that brings with it quite significant costs. The model at the moment is very much cost recovery. So where the costs lie, the costs are recovered. So we do need to be very aware of the financial model as we go through this and making sure that the impact on our ratepayers isn't misplaced, if you like. There is a statement there that rates will be the primary source of funds. Okay, that's good, but I mean, is it the ratepayer that's going to be benefiting from this? So there's a balance to be achieved there with the financial modelling. So I think that we just need to really keep our eye on the ball as we go through this, as to having that balance where we want the development, we want the infrastructure providers, home builders, etc., and we want to encourage them in that, but not at the cost to the ratepayers in general.
No more comments. Then I'm going to ask Councillor Tupara.
Just a further issue that was raised by Councillor Foster and staff offered a response to that, and that was around selection of Māori representation. I kind of missed your response there. Well, it was a bit, it happened a bit quick, but just wanting to get some clarity around what that process is for electing Māori into these positions.
So I guess the process is a little bit vague still, but there will be a Māori appointing body or bodies that iwi and hapu of the region will decide amongst themselves what these Māori appointing bodies look like. And there could be one for the region or there could be more than one. And that's a conversation that iwi and hapu have amongst themselves. So it's independent of council. And then once they organize themselves into a appointing body, they will organize a process for appointing people, again, independent of the council.
Would be useful to have some more clarity when clarity comes on what that
So
is going to look like.
There was a urgent treaty Waitangi tribunal inquiry into the process and whether it was treaty compliant, and they found it has potential to be treaty compliant, but we don't know until we see the detail. Yes.
And can I just add to that, that currently, so the MFE have been working with iwi across New Zealand and in Tairāwhiti in terms of how to give effect to the current treaty settlements via these RPCs. So how can they participate in these regional planning committees whilst also giving effect to what was outlined in the Settlement Act. So there has been direct negotiation with MFE and iwi around what that might look like.
Councillor Pahuru Huriwai.
Good, everybody. Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to support Councillor Telfer with his put it all around the reducing bureaucracy, and also support Councillor Cranston's put it all around the reduction of costs. And I'm just looking at point 4 on page 48. That one? Gosh, no, it wasn't that one. It was. Oh, yes, existing point 4 on page 48, existing barriers should be removed and new tools added to enable meaningful partnerships with mana whenua. Māori land is really complex with multiple ownership. We can't just sell it if we wanted to. Often inherit the, like with the forestry blocks, inheriting all of that. So the barriers, it's good to see that in there. The execution of that is going to be interesting to see roll out. I also had a question about the impact of the change of leadership with our new Prime Minister, and whether there's been an environmental scan done around how that might impact on all of this, or too early days yet, is it?
Through you, Chair, I'd say too early at the moment. We do know that the new Prime Minister has indicated that he will be re-looking at the work program that the current government has in place and deciding what is still a priority and what would be deferred or slowed down. Obviously, this legislation is in Parliament, so it is happening. It will be interesting to see where the select committee process ends up as well and what recommendations they make.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, any other questions or queries? I just want to again say thank you, Joe. Nadine, you're part of Taituara. I'm on the board of Local Government New Zealand. So we also from that areas get those submissions that we work on behalf. So we do get the best from everywhere, and we give the best advice from this region as well. I know that they really rely on our teams as well to give them feedback of what works here and what doesn't work. So if I have a mover for this, Councillor Gregory, seconded by Councillor Foster. If there are no more questions or queries, I'll put it to the table. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you for that. Okay, next we move to water services legislation, which are 2 papers. Welcome, Yvette. So as you will see, there are 2 bills that we are dealing with. And Yvette and Nadine will guide us through some of that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Just Just to outline in terms of the reports that you've got there, effectively 3 reports. And just because of the way the agenda is structured, we probably should have suggested you start with the noting report, which is already in action. And then these are 2 subsequent bills that have come out from there. So it might have been a little bit hard to get the flow as you were reading through the agenda. So apologies for that. I'll hand over to Yvette to take us through the papers.
And just before we start, Yvette, the same that I was just saying in regards to Joe, thank you for the thorough work that's gone into these as well. When I read through it, I thought we've seen lots of it before, but I know so much work has gone over all the holidays time and everything. So just thank you on behalf of councillors as well. Just leave it, yeah.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Ko Yvette te Sarataku ingoa. I am really pleased to come see you. I just, for those of you that don't know, there's a couple of new faces. I did work for the council for a number of years, and I'm pleased to be coming back to help and support the council with this mahi. It's humongous. And it's nice to see some new faces and old faces around the table. So, ngā mihi kia koutou. Yeah, this just wanted to start with some. This is an enormous piece of work that the government is trying to do really quickly. I'll start with what's in front of us today. There are 2 bills that are currently out for submission right now. There's a couple that have already passed, as you'll see from the paper. Now, these 2 bills only had their readings on the 13th and 14th of December, and they've asked for submissions from council to come in by the 17th of February. That's a really short time frame to get through what we've got through. So, especially over the Christmas close down, and I do want to caveat what's in the report with this is a work in progress. The situation is that you're not due to meet until the 23rd of February again, at which point it would be too late to come back to you with a formalised full submission. So hence we've got a partial submission with some key points we've identified to date, but we are seeking still engaging with the rest of the sector to understand the implications, as well as seeking some legal advice on some of the provisions in the bill and their implications for council and Te Tairāwhiti communities. So that's the caveat on what's in front of you today. We're asking, because we don't have another council meeting before the submissions are due, we're asking you to sign off on to agree to make a submission and to look at some of the critical points we've identified so far. There is a workshop on the 15th of February, at which point we'll be able to come back to you with a draft of a submission. So this won't be the last thing you'll see. It's just that this is the decision meeting.
See, that's where I got the 2 weeks from. I knew somewhere I read we're going to have a workshop, but not about what we spoke earlier. This was the 2 weeks I got.
Yeah, so apologies that this is all very Mickey Mouse and ridiculous, but yeah, that's the situation that we've been put into with the timeframes. Kia ora.
Kia ora,
And we
thank
have
you
a
for
wee
that.
presentation too.
Right.
Is it up?
Yes, thank you. We're just going to have a presentation and then we'll go to questions.
Just thought some pictures might help, because it certainly has helped me to prepare some diagrams on some of the things that are in. I wish I had better eyes. It's real hard to see from there. Yeah. Just open it up on my screen as well, so we can coordinate now. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things to set us in context. There's 4 pieces of legislation that a government is proposing as part of this. Sorry, I'm just. Taumata Arawai has been in place since 2021. That's the drinking water regulator. They will eventually also have some powers to regulate wastewater and stormwater, parts of it. This is where it gets very tricky. The water services entities, we're on the second slide. Oh, there it is there, it's me. The Water Services Entities Act was the act that was passed just before Christmas, and it covers the establishment and the governance arrangements for these new water services entities at the what I'm calling the super regional level, and the transitional arrangements for moving across functions and powers across from council to the new water service entities.
Can I interrupt? With a new Prime Minister and a possible change of government later in the year, I assume those dates might change or swap around a bit.
Yes, that is the biggest monkey in the room of the entire situation. I will talk a little bit more about it when we get to the transition section, because we're investing massively as a staff into this work. And so I will talk around this, and probably also at the 15th of February, we'll be able to lay out for you all of the parts of the transition. Right. So you can see the inner workings more as well. And then you will realise just how much of an investment this actually is for councils, and some of the really critical matters, such as how are we going to navigate an LTP process amidst all of this. So yeah, I suppose the purpose of today really is just to try and make sure that whatever is in the bills doesn't supports us to carry on doing our functions, and it doesn't leave us in the lurch if that does happen and there is a policy U-turn or a reversal or a shift or a change. But
or a slowdown maybe in time frame.
Yeah, which would be good.
Well, this is what I was thinking. I can't see any speed up of time frames. So if there are any changes, it will give us more time to.
Yeah. So there is a water services, the two parts of the puzzle today that we're looking at are the final two pieces that are envisaged to date. Water Services Legislation Bill is the critical bill. This is the bit that gives the detailed powers and functions to the water services entities, and we were hoping it would talk about the crossover between what they will do and what councils will carry on doing and how the two will interrelate. There is a lot in it. It amends 29 acts. So there's amendments to the Resource Management Act, the Local Government Act under it. So it's a massive piece of work that is changing a whole bunch of stuff. It is also bringing in, while the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill, let's call that the economic bill for the purposes of this, is going to regulate the price and quality of water services. That's largely a matter. The pricing and the structure of pricing for water sits in the Water Services Legislation Bill. Okay, so it's that is, I just wanted to emphasize the real critical nature of that Water Services Legislation Bill. This is the devil in the detail. But I do, to make it make sense, I just wanted to quickly go through the first act. I won't go through Taumata Arawai Act because that's been in place for some time, and I'm sure Dave's spoken to you about that before. But I do want to go through the Water Services Entities Act because that does set up the foundation structure upon which some of these amendments are made in the current bill. And I wanted to point out, because based on Councillor Tuputa's question about mana whenua, there is a really strong reference throughout these bills to mana whenua, not to iwi, and to generic principles of Te Reti Waitangi, as well as treaty settlement obligations. So yeah, there is that. They have done been clearer, I suppose, in this. Essentially, sorry, I keep forgetting to change your one too. So the governance structures, essentially, if I'm overviewing this, they are removing some of the powers of councils away from water services. Councils will essentially, under this, be able to nominate people to the regional representative group, the TA, representing the TA owners. Mana whenua will nominate their own representatives through their process, and there will be equal co-governance. That is the body that is everyone's accountable to. So councils will no longer have any direct influence on water services provision, except to veto a divestment proposal. So where a water service entity wants to sell off a significant asset, and I say the word significant because some of the minor assets may not be caught under this. So smaller assets may not form part of this. Thinking in terms of if for instance, oh gosh, I don't want to say anything that's going to freak people out. Dave, can you answer that one? Yeah.
The intention is for the WSC to still be able to dispose of assets like vehicles, plant, equipment, those kind of things. So otherwise, the way the legislation was written, it would have to go right back up. So this is to be able to get rid of things like we do now when we sell vehicles or other smaller assets, but it hasn't been completely defined yet.
Thanks, Dave. One of the good things that's happened through the changes through the submissions process is the regional representative group no longer has a cap on the maximum number of members. So for instance, it may have 44 members. So yeah, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that in terms of representation for entities like Entity C, which has 21 councils, 30 iwi, 240 hapu and marae potentially as well, that may be something that the regional representative group may want to consider as going beyond the mandatory minimum of 12 members.
I can just imagine 23 mayors,
yeah,
all wanting to get onto one group, because Wellington don't speak for us, Nelson don't speak for us, and they feel exactly the same way as we do about them. And the same for iwi.
Yeah.
In your region, you want to speak for your people. So it is a big ask.
Yes, it is a very big ask. And I will point out the regional advisory panels, the little yellow box down to the bottom left, as one of the mechanisms that they have strengthened through the submissions process to provide more for local voice. And they run, and they're essentially structured the same as the RRG. They are co-governed, they are appointed by TAs and mana whenua, and that's to give a specific local voice for a geographic area. So, and they now have powers that are a little bit, quite a bit stronger in terms of being able to feed into the statement of strategic performance expectation that an RRG gives to a board that's outlining what they want them to achieve strategically. So these RAPs will feed into that. They will also feed into the layer of documentation underneath that, asset management plans and funding and pricing plans. So they are intended to be a link back to the community. I'll talk more about this later. It's critical that you bear this in mind now, though.
Quick question, and then I agree with what Councillor I broke the rule first. Ask the first question. We should listen to the presentation first and then ask our question. Yep, you can ask. Yep.
We act as subsidiaries. So all of a sudden, that subsidiary can achieve objectives of shareholders, deliver functions.
Yeah, that's further down.
Maybe a trading organisation may pay dividends to a shareholder.
So they just said it is actually being answered.
Yeah. So I'm going through the presentation in terms of setting the framework for what is actually in place right now. So we can't change this. This stuff can't change. When we talk about this, yeah. I'm trying to show you this is the one part that's in place now, so that there's no confusion that we can't change the RAPs, we can't change the RRGs. It's an act now. The bits that we can change and seek to influence is the bits later on. And yeah, very good points.
Thank you. So I'm going to incorporate our rules now, which I broke first. We'll finish the presentation and then I'm going to open up the floor for all questions. Thank you.
I
I'm
just,
gonna turn off my mic. Oh, my mic is not. Annie, I just said we're going to keep our questions to right at the end, because what we are doing is asking questions where the answers are later in the presentation. So Yvette, without further ado, we'll hand back to you and we'll ask questions right at the end. Thank you.
so and I wanted to go over ownership because it was a real hot point early on in the Three Waters debates for councils. And I wanted to make it really clear that the assets that council owns currently now, such as the wastewater treatment plant, the pipes in the ground and all of those things, they will transfer to a WSE. They will not appear on our financial balance sheets as in any way. They will not be in our LTP. They will transfer as of right to the WSEs under this system. Council will actually then have shares in the water services entity. So we'll be a shareholder. We have 2 shares. Again, what those shares allow us to do is to have a decision or a vote on the regional representation group membership, which is critical, and also to any council can veto essentially a divestment proposal of a significant asset. So it only takes one council to say no. So it's essentially quite hard to sell these assets off. So privatization is not necessarily something that is going to happen in the foreseeable future. Because we have 2 shares, if you look at the arrangements for you should have a look strategically as councillors at what the other TAs who are within each to see how many shares they might have. I think Wellington has 5.
For 50,000 people.
Yeah, they got 200,000. So Wellington City Council has 5, I think, so collectively Wellington Water holds a large chunk. However, I did look at it and I don't think it means that they don't necessarily have a majority, so to speak, in terms of water entity C as yet. However, I have noticed they have been doing quite a bit of relationship building. So there is so that the critical part will be in how GDC will wield its shares to determine who's on the RRG. Why the RRG is so important is that the RRG will be able to change the constitution to set up essentially what the water service entity will look like, including the membership of the board, the number and location of the regional advisory panels, some really critical decisions that the RRG has some functions and powers over, reviewing and insisting that the WSEs have certain things in their statements of intent and giving them a strategic direction. So the RRGs are quite critical. So we will just move to the next slide. There's some really good provisions in here and around tangata whenua, Māori rights and interests. Obviously, it's clear there's co-governance of RRGs and RAPs. These are really clear in the bill. They had not changed subsequently through the new act that we'll talk about. The Water Service Entity Board has to collectively have capabilities in terms of mātauranga, tikanga, and understanding of treaty and te mana o te wai. And there are some generic requirements on Water Service Entity to partner and engage early and meaningfully with Māori, give us honour treaty settlements and the principles of te tiriti. And why that was critical that they included that, and we asked for that to be included, is that we have a number of relationships and engagements that are not formed with mana whenua, which are not formed based in a treaty settlement. They are because we have decided to do that. So these are our co-management plans and things and these relationships that we have, and we wanted to make sure that those would continue to be honoured. give effect to te mana o te wai and enable, support and enable the exercise of kaitiakitanga, mātauranga and tikanga, which is really consistent with the way the central government's direction on a whole range of matters. Likewise, the community rights and interests, they now have some more powers through the regional advisory panels to actually influence the strategic direction of a water services entity. They can take part, there will be a water service entity must have a consumer fora, at least one forum. They can have more than one, and that's for engagement purposes with a WSC on some of its. It's largely around its performance. So these tools are largely around, are people happy with the way that the water service entity is performing in terms of delivering water services? And they also have a role in terms of divestment decisions. So as you saw by that previous slide here, if you look in that box, there's a process that you go through for divestment that includes a poll of electors in the service area. So before divesting, say if we wanted to sell off the wastewater treatment plant, there would need to be a poll of those people, Gisborne City, and 75% of people in the area would have to agree. And that poll is similar to a poll that's held under the local government for our elections. So it's not a go out and choose people that you think will support you. And here we come to the building the plane as we're flying at the transition arrangements. There are a number of really meaty things in here that we want to talk with you in more detail, as you know, on the 15th of February. They are largely internal matters that are around things like which assets will transfer and what is the requirements on us. So basically, I do a nice picture of this. I'll do the picture in the next, I will talk a bit more about the transition later, but the critical part in here that I wanted to talk about was that DIA has oversight powers, and these are going to have an impact. So that's the transition arrangements. There's our picture, and that picture is exactly what it feels like to be involved in this process, isn't it, Nadine? But it's diabolical.
Build while we fly.
Yep. Never knowing, we haven't actually created the landing gear yet. So the DIA has oversight powers now. As I said, these are in place. They're not negotiable. If we're going to make a decision that impacts on, as in council is going to make a decision that impacts on water services provision, so not just around assets or anything, but something that might impact on water services, it needs to be notified to the Department of Internal Affairs. They have power to veto anything that they think is considered significant that will, for those reasons there, significantly prejudice the reforms, constrain the powers or capability of a water services entity once it starts working. So things like selling off a major asset, entering into a long-term contract that's going to bind a future water service entity to having to use that contractor and not allow it to enter into its own bulk contracting arrangements. All of these kinds of things, they're trying to protect, to ensure that, number one, councils don't go and ramp up a whole bunch of debt right before they transfer over around Three Waters, that we don't sell off our assets unnecessarily, and that they retain control over that, and that we don't enter into long-term binding arrangements or agreements that are going to potentially hamstring them later on. So this is what they're trying to achieve through this. There is a process that is intended to happen. Why I'm telling you this is the stuff that's going to go on in the background, probably before you get a decision on Three Waters. We have to notify the DAA that we intend to make a decision that will impact or may impact on water services delivery. They come back to us immediately and tell us if they think it's significant or not. No, actually, if it's significant. Then they have said they will get us back to us as quickly as practicable, confirming the decision or declining the decision or asking for more information. So essentially they've given themselves an average time of 20 working days. However, they make no, what's the word? Promises that it won't go any further than, that it won't be for more significant decisions, that it won't be further. There are significant implications for this that we will discuss on the 15th of February, especially around LTPs, and Dave will likely have identified by then some stuff that is may be subject to these significant decision criteria. So just wanting you to know that that will go on once the DIA has confirmed a decision, then it will come to you for decision. There's a real risk if things come to you before a decision, that it's reversed, and that sort of undermines the, undermines the faith of the public, and that we know what we're doing. Really, it's not good for anyone. So, yeah. So that's the So this is the new stuff. Subsidiaries, this is the point, this is the bit that Councillor Foster was mentioning. Now, under the new amendments to the bill, water service entity boards can establish subsidiaries. So this is essentially an action station, or a way to give effect fast to. I'm not signalling this because I think it's a bad shift, because I think in some cases there may be some instances where delivery by a subsidiary would be actually really efficient and appropriate, where there may be some cases where standardization is appropriate, for instance. But it will depend entirely on what the functions and deliverables are of a subsidiary, and that is within the control of the shareholders. My understanding is that the shareholders would be the water services entity board or boards that set up the subsidiary. And the report goes in to talk about how you can have a board can establish a subsidiary by itself to deliver the functions, or it can join up with other water services entities boards and have a joint subsidiary. Which is what I was talking about there in terms of some efficiencies across the system for delivering stock standard things, maybe like compliance and monitoring and enforcement and things like that. So I can see that what they're trying to do here. The issue with it is the limited accountability back to communities for those operational arrangements. We're seeking some more legal advice on this around the powers of the RRG to influence through that statement of strategic performance expectation. How much influence can they wield through that will reach a subsidiary, how much will pass on to them. So that's pricing and charging is a really, really sensitive topic for this. Essentially, there'll be a couple of different mechanisms that a water services entity can use. They can adopt a geographic averaging model or approach or tool, which would basically mean that the costs for delivery of that water service are averaged across the entire entity or across a geographic area within an entity. So they have lots of different tools as per the report. And that they also may introduce volumetric charging, which is charging, and the risks and rewards of those different models are outlined in the report. I won't labour them. What I will labour that probably wasn't in the report was that the government policy statement on water services that the government must establish by 2027 will set out the limits on volumetric charging. So it has the powers to intervene on some of this stuff, to talk about, to require that an entity use geographic averaging versus volumetrics. So that's a really, really big power that the government has. In the submission, what we would suggest that we say is that there is some right of input into that GPS for water services from local councils and from people, that it's not just done by an ordering council as the minister sees fit. Yeah. Contribution charges, the big one here is that the Crown is exempting itself from contribution charges related to water services. And then I refer in the report to the Kāinga order and the impact that that could have on Tairāwhiti in terms of if those costs are going to have to be covered somehow. And when you have a low or a no development contribution charge for one or more group, those costs that there's still costs to build the infrastructure or to increase the infrastructure. So the costs then go to everyone else in that. And the government is a significant developer. So yeah, something that we'd like to know your thoughts on. One of the big things around pricing and charging that we keep hammering to the government and to the NTU is that where is the focus on affordability for communities? There is a focus under the principles or the functions, objectives of a water service entity to consider financial sustainability, but that is the financial sustainability of them and their ability to operate as an organisation. There is no focus on what communities can afford. And there is nothing in this new bill here that makes us feel that this is adequately addressed as at a principle level, you know. Given that the government, when it issued these three waters reforms, one of its bottom lines, or one of its principles was affordability for communities. You know, there's also no focus on the over combined cost to a ratepayer, taxpayer of these reforms. So for instance, while a water services entity might be able to deliver its functions for the same as what council cannot drop down, cannot just remove all costs related to water services, because some of those costs are things like overheads. They're costs shared across the organisation. So there will be stranded costs and stuff which we will have to rate for. The cost of doing our business does not necessarily go down proportionate to the taking out of the three waters. So we'll have more information about that at the February workshop as well, hopefully, and further on. The big one that we were also concerned about was council's planning functions and how the bill would be would impact on those. We've got a big changes in the RM space, and I was listening to the presentation from Joanna, which was really, really, I can hear your pain, councillors who spoke on that matter. What is really, really annoying about the bills having come out is that when the act was passed, this last one in December, they made a statement in the select committee's report that said it is the intention that councils remain as plan makers and that the water service entity will be plan takers. So when council does its regional growth strategies and all its land use planning, and that it's up to the water service entity to take that information and give effect to it. That was the intention. That's what that means. We're not seeing anything in this new bill which we thought would hammer home this. We see nothing in this bill that is really clarifying that, and it's really concerning. So we one of the points of the submission would be to make sure there's a really strong link with the regional spatial strategies. I also had a really quick look through the NBA, the bill that was just discussed earlier on the agenda. Again, I didn't see anything in there that links with the powers of a water service entity. In fact, the bill actually amends the old RMA, so which is not going to be around. So anyway. What we do have is a planning technical reference group that was set up under the National Transition Unit, and they have completed a report with recommendations that at some point might form part of either this bill or the natural and built environment spatial planning bills. And the things that they have said in there are, and this is what I would really want to understand your thoughts about, is that they wanted to see the water service entity as an active participant in RMA planning, as the providers of key infrastructure to support that. They want to see the water service entity planning aligning with RMA planning. And they want to see water services entities be members of regional planning committees. Yeah. So that's something I would like you to hear your thoughts on.
Just say that again.
It's the critical point is the third bullet point, which is the wanting water services entities to be members of regional planning committees. Oh shit, sorry. Oops.
We will pass on that one bit. I'll give you just one yellow ticket.
Oh God. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, so these are the three. The Planning Technical Reference Group report was issued in November, and however, those are three critical things that they talked about, recommendations they made in terms of legislative change to support integration. Yeah, I will draw you back to them when we have some questions and some discussion later on. It's pretty critical that we understand your thoughts on that, because they may start to appear in the bills at some point. We got legal advice pending on this about the best way to create that stronger link with the RM functions of councils. So more on that on the 15th. Changes. Stormwaters are really interesting. I'm going to have to turn around. So the way that they are envisaging stormwater, and we're really lucky because we've had David Wilson, our Director of Lifelines, has been involved in advising the NTU. Please don't blame any of this on him. I think we've had a much better and stronger outcome because of his involvement. It's more reflective of the reality of the situation, because what they were proposing before was probably a hell of a lot worse than this. So the functions and powers for stormwater are divided. This is very complicated. I'm going to show you on my little picture so that you can continue to hear. Basically, this is where the water services entity will have its functions. It will control stormwater in the urban area. The road controlling authorities, such as council and NZTA, will maintain control over stormwater in the road corridor and transport corridor. So all of that. Land drainage in the rural areas will remain with councils in terms of delivery. Cool, eh? Essentially what this means is we are going to have all of this spelt out in a relationship agreement and service level agreements with NTU. It isn't simple. Some other critical parts is that the questions that we have are around wanting to understand. We just need to tease out a little bit more what the potential might be for some of our ratepayers to be charged essentially twice for some of this stuff. So for instance, it's probably not a big issue, but we need to check it. Where they are in rural townships, what are the boundaries going to be in terms of where a water services entity rate would apply for stormwater versus a land drainage rate for council. And we want to make sure that people are not paying two sets. That will be something that we are seeking legal advice around, whether we can put that into a relationship agreement, whether has that power to do, we have that power to do that. Because the stormwater, the water service entity can create stormwater management plans for the bits that are under their control. Sorry, they can create them for the whole city area, including the roads and stuff. But they have to engage with councils and road controlling authorities in the development of those plans. So there's we sort of suggest that's quite a good thing. You know, some integration around this would be useful. So the stormwater management plan becomes quite a critical tool to ensure that integration. So we're not off doing all of our own stuff differently. It also might, water services entity also can create environmental standards for stormwater. So there's the stormwater quality of stormwater coming into its system. So that is again something we're seeking advice on, because we want to be able to show to you how the regulatory powers sit. So sit for each part of the stormwater system. So for instance, discharges are regulated under a Resource Management Act. So, and Taumata Arawai has powers to regulate the quality of drinking water, will have powers to regulate the quality of stormwater at some point in the future. The Commerce Commission also has powers to regulate price and quality. So there are all of these things up in the air, which we just want legal advice to actually formally tell us who has the powers for what will trump what. So yeah, as you can tell, we're a little bit sort of, trying to still seek that clarification. Another critical part is the transfer of assets and liabilities, and this is how it kind of we have gleaned that it might work. I'm getting better. That there are a number of, essentially, the Department of Internal Affairs, the CE must prepare what's called an allocation schedule for each council. The stuff that goes into those allocation schedules is information about Three Waters assets, and Three Waters contracts, Three Waters debt, and it's also information about mixed use assets, such as things about the stormwater network, and also things about where a reserve might have some stormwater function as well. So all of this information goes into an allocation schedule. There is a negotiation process between the councils and the DIA about what is primarily used for like Three Waters purposes, and then some decisions are made around what will transfer, and a relationship agreement we formed out of that to identify how we're going to manage any shared assets, any shared responsibilities, and shared services. And then there'll be a number of service level agreements as well for more detailed delivery. Okay, so it's kind of, that's the process. It's, we have a number of questions around this as well. Economic regulation is, economic regulation is not what we thought it was going to be. We thought it was going to be the ability for them to, for our body to regulate how things are priced for. It's not actually necessarily all about that, because all the pricing stuff is in the water services bill, so legislation bill. This is a really new to us. We've just had the Solgum webinar this morning, which I walked out of to come into this meeting. So I haven't actually heard all of the information yet. Yeah, we'll have more of that on the 15th. This is what we're seeking advice on, so that you know these are the questions, and that all of the things that I've talked about. Stormwater, we want to also understand what the water service entities' powers might be for stopping services. Can they do that, stop services to our community based on a non-payment of a bill, for instance? We want to understand the economic regulation regime impacts for council and communities. And we want, there's some things under that third section of bullet points that we need to understand about the current act as well, and the application of it. So for instance, DIA's powers, DIA has powers to make reasonable requests for councils to give them information and potentially staff to be seconded. We don't really have a right to refuse if it's reasonable. So what we are wanting to seek from a lawyer is some sort of legal advice about what might constitute reasonable. So we have that in our back pocket for when, if things become hideous. We also want to understand the how through the legal advice what they think the implications of excluding Three Waters for the 2024 LTP might be. How would it work? And there are a number of financial matters about asset transfer that Pauline has identified that we really need to get some more information about. So that is, I'm gonna just one more slide, okay, promise. And it's just to tell you what's next. And that's, these are the critical things. So now that we know what the legislation, all of the parts of the legislation are out in public, so we now can actually start to look and map out what it's going to do. We can now start to get an idea of what things will transfer to a water service entity and what residual functions council might have to maintain. By that I mean, we need to be a smart buyer in engaging with the water services entity. So when we give them our spatial plans and our growth strategies and the like, we need to be able to also be smart enough to be able to say to them, and you need to build this sort of infrastructure here, and you need to be able to do this here. So that's we want to understand what those kinds of functions might be that we need to retain in-house. There are also relationship functions that are going to have to be, there's a lot of engagement and partnering with the water service entity on delivery. So we're going to need to understand what those functions might be as well. We want Pauline starting to think really seriously about, once we have a functions map identified of what we do and what we do now and what we might do in the future, the financial implications of that. And we also want to understand the debt and asset and liability transfer, what that does to our financial position. It's very critical. And that includes the quantification of any stranded costs. All that stuff's kind of wrapped up together. The second critical part is that we want to understand the impacts on the long-term plan process. And there are a number of things that Nadine's raised with the Department of Internal Affairs and the Auditor General around how that's going to work. And we're just waiting for some technical advice to come through from them around what we can and can't do. And that's it. And I apologise for the length. I hope that was helpful. If it's not, please tell me.
Well, it's very helpful. It's still a very confusing process for everyone involved. Just trying to get my head around all the acronyms. I had to go back and look, what is this? No, it's the names being used. It's a really complex process. And thank you for trying to analyze and keep us up to date with it. It is really complex. But what I'm going to do is open up. If there are some questions from, oh, I see the hands going up. We'll start there, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, Councillor Alder.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation. And what amazes me is how you were able to control your language.
She didn't.
Written presentation, because while I read it, while reading it, I certainly couldn't contain mine.
Microphone.
Sorry, I should have started properly. Thank you, Your Worship. So that said, while reading it, I certainly couldn't contain my language. It seems shocking that this is being imposed on us. I'm new to council. I don't believe this sort of thing's ever happened before, or we'd have all heard about it.
Not in
The way I see it, that we're going to have the RRG, the WSC, two major levels of unknown size, which, because I don't think they're going to be able to function, they realise now they've created a monster. They're going to create lots of little monsters, which are actually probably like the district councils used to be, called subsidiaries. Only difference being is we're all going to be taxed extra to pay for the whole lot. And within the report, there's lots of little anomalies, like the 25% threshold on sale of an item. I just think, well, okay, so you can sell 20% without consultation? Is that the way it's running? Or did I perhaps misread that? Anyway, I just hope that this new government can maybe reassess things. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Foster, I hear your frustration.
Look, I'm exactly the same with Councillor Alder. I'm just looking at this whole thing and saying, oh my God, what the heck? You know, we've got a council, a unitary authority that has managed water, stormwater and wastewater and done it to the best of our capacity with the funds and the resources that we've got. If we had more funds and more resources, we could probably speed up a lot of things like drainwise and all the other different problems that we're having here. Now, we're going to have no control whatsoever. You know, we've got a, you know, regional representation group, mana whanua, councils, water services entity bill, Auditor General. There's subsidiaries that could come from the water services bill, the water centres services entity. We've got a 3 Waters National Transition Unit, an NTU, to manage the transition of assets, liabilities and people to the WSE. The DIA, Department of Internal Affairs, who will have oversight and do whatever they like, whenever they like, to whatever we've got. And then we've also got a water services economic regulator and a consumer protector. Holy heck, what the heck? Who devised all this stuff? What's all this stuff coming from? Hopefully this new Prime Minister or new government, if we get a new one, will just say this is a lot of rubbish and just scrub the whole lot, because this must be just costing every council in the country unbelievable amount of money. This is just absolutely, this is ridiculous. I've never seen such a ridiculous plan or transition in all my life. You know, where's the guarantee that our drainwise program is going to be enhanced and sped up and we're not going to have any more sewage into the bay? There's nothing. You know, so look, you know, I know we've been opposed to this right from the start, and I just hope, even though they've agreed and put these bills through at pace and given us little time to respond to it, that we just stand up and say enough is enough. You know, this is rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
Thank you
I'll leave
for
it at
that. I hear your frustration. Councillor Telfer, are you going to do the 3rd in the row of disgruntled gentlemen?
I will keep this very short.
You'll keep it short and sharp.
Look, I see everybody's frustration, and I don't need to go into that anymore, I don't think. The one thing I picked up out of that whole thing was the water service entity. I've got a real concern around the regional planning, which we do, and the delivery of the by the WSC. Now, if I'm reading this right, we go and do long-term plans. We say this is what we want to do in our district. We want to put a brand new pipe from the river to the you know, to get the sewage over there and eliminate going out to the bay. So we want to do this. That's in our regional plan. It's up to these guys to deliver it. They turn around and say, oh, we can't justify that spend. So where are we at? We've lost the control of what we do, our destiny. We're at their whim to actually fund this sort of thing. And I thought the whole idea of this was to be able to fund some of the infrastructure that needs to happen. And if that's not one of the infrastructure things that needs to happen, and look, in our defence and previous councillors' defence, we've got a small rate base. We can't afford to do everything we want to do. This idea of this was to be able to fix some of these problems. Now, I see that they've got the right then to say, well, no, we're not doing that, even though it's in our regional plan. So I think that's probably one of the areas that we've got to really push for, and we can use as a means to actually try and pull this up a little bit. Because if I'm reading it right, and I may be wrong, I see that as one of the biggest barriers to this actually succeeding, and when it was the whole aim of doing this. So if the whole aim of doing this to improve our infrastructure, be able to fund our infrastructure that we need, there's a mechanism there to bring it to a halt and not achieve it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Keep it short.
Keep it short and sharp. Councillor Wharenga and then Councillor Parata.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just want to lend my voice in support to a couple of things that you'd said, Ms. Kinsella. The first one being us, I completely endorse the point that you made about that it should be us being plan makers and being plan takers, right? It should absolutely be that. Oh, actually, before that too, as Councillor Foss has already said, he's echoed the concerns that I've shared yourself and Councillor in regards to this in front of us. But in response, to give you some feedback about what your submission will be, completely support you in regards to that. The next thing is I think about the affordability issues for our community, right? And in none of our plans do we ever really discuss actual this is how we will make this affordable. That's usually fees and charges that's attached to this plan. So really keen on the submission being really strong about how we can control those things for our community, because like we've all agreed, this is a steam train that's just rolling ahead over all of us. So the little tooth and nail parts where we can fight and hold on to some things to try and help keep our community not getting steamrolled in terms of fees and charges and things like that. I'd really be keen for that to be a strong part of our submission.
Thank you for that. Councillor Karata.
I think one of the main issues is just how absolutely complex this is. And if it's that complex and it took over 45 minutes of you doing your very best to explain it to us, what is the most confusing proposal I've ever seen in a room full of very clever people, yourself included, that probably tells me it's not a very good idea. Hey.
You should have spoken after the gentleman.
So I do. I support what the side of the table is saying, and want to thank you for the recommendations and the explanations and the diagrams, because they do make sense when you explain them with commentary. But I should be able to look at a diagram for water services and it should make sense.
Yep.
I do have those same concerns, mostly because similarly to what happened today, we don't own the forestry industry, and yet here we are answering for them. It seems as though the responsibility for water and stormwater will be taken away, but we'll be the answer for it. And I've got real concerns. Around being responsible and accountable to our communities, even when central government have moved that responsibility away from us. So that's the first point. The second point is something that myself, Ani, in particular have raised more than once, is that there are lots and lots of homes in Te Tairāwhiti, and this is the complication of Te Tairāwhiti really, is there's lots of homes that aren't connected to any kind of town water system. And my concerns really, and it's not even a question for you to ask, but perhaps something that central government needs to consider, is how are they being captured in this? And what's their responsibility and affordability to pay for something that they don't even have? And I assume they're not getting plugs up there. So those are my thoughts, and I just wanted to actually commend the mahi that you've been doing and the absolute complication that has landed in our laps. And while I understand that we needed a change in the way that three waters, or the storm waters and rain waters and drinking water is delivered, if a system is this complicated and it doesn't allow us to directly impact the delivery of our strategic planning, then I can't understand how that's good for our people.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gregory and then Councillor Cranston. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a couple of specific questions. So in it, it's mentioned that water metering, so volumetric charging, and we have that in our long-term plan that we're going to do that. But there needs to be a certain amount of consultation and all of that sort of jazz before we get to that point. And is that going to be the responsibility of the new WSC, or does council have to do that before this happens, or what? I got another one.
You want me? I'll respond.
Oh, yeah. The other thing is on page 93, 193 point. Oh no, it's 194. And point 48. It just seems to me that people are going to get the same rates bill and a water bill.
Yep.
It just seems like that. Now, that's just not on. There's no way we can afford that here. And The last thing I just want to say is I've never seen a report with so many mays and mites in it. It's really hard to take all that in and you're thinking, might it or will it? Or, yeah, so thank you. Oh, and you can answer that.
The consultation, just the process around.
Sure. So in terms of volumetrics, essentially, while council might have it in its annual plan, long-term plan now, it's not going to be the responsibility of council in the future. So it wouldn't be something that we would go out and start consulting on now because it's going to be determined by a water service entity in the future.
So will they have to consult?
Yeah, so that's the that is the critical thing, is that we want to make sure that
Through your
No,
worship,
no,
there's very limited things that the water service entity will need to change on. A lot of that will be set through the economic regulation component when it comes through, but it won't be consultation like our community is used to with long-term plans. It'll be very different consultation.
And every house in Gisborne has a meter anyway, don't they?
So the water services legislation bill sets out all of the stuff about pricing and charging. So that is the bill that is critical. That sets out a number of principles and it sets out the process for setting the charges. The economic regulation bill is actually about at arm's length. As the intention of it is that it will ensure transparency for consumers in that price setting. They understand what their role, why they're being charged, what they're being charged. They will also be able to, they'll be able to have some powers to regulate that pricing in terms of making sure that there's a price quality pathway, which we don't fully understand what that means now, but are they getting value for money through what they're doing? They will, the economic regulator, which will essentially the Commerce Commission is going to be delivering all of this. The Commerce Commission will be able to review all the asset management plans and all of those dot funding and pricing plans to make sure that this is value for money for consumers. But the critical part is the pricing principles and the engagement is captured under the water services legislation bill. And yes, we will make sure that we say that that needs to be strengthened for local communities. I just do want to say the reason for the may and might is that because it's a submission and it's a proposed bill at the moment. And your question about getting two bills was actually raised another point for me to mention to you that council will be responsible for billing of communities. Sorry, council won't be billing through our system. The water services entity will be giving council, can request or can almost demand that councils collect the money for water services on behalf of a water services entity. And we can charge reasonable costs back to them for the delivery of that service. A lot of councils are getting quite pent up about that because I'm not sure that I'm as concerned about it because we are able to charge back the reasonable costs for doing that service. And so if we need to employ new staff to do this stuff, that then as far as we would be concerned, they pay for that. The issue is that in the message that it signals, which is exactly what Councillor Parata was talking about, and when you get a bill from the council and it includes your water services charges, who are they going to ring when they're worried about it? And so that is, I think that is a critical point, but I will be led by you guys on terms of what you want to put in the submission.
Councillor Pahura Huriwai and then Councillor Cranston.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Yvette. Massive amounts of work you and your team have put into that. I just want to tautoko everyone's thanks. And I've got lots more questions, but what I'm not seeing yet is the Te Ao Māori worldview on this. And I know that iwi leads have other views. I don't know them all, but I would really like to see when we meet about this on the 15th of February, if Tina Porau, who is the lead advisor to the iwi leads chairs in this space, could have some time to present to us how they're looking at this. because I don't see any of a Te Ao Māori, what do you call it, view over anything that we've read or seen. At the moment, it all sounds really dire and really hard for moving forward in terms of the impact this is going to have on our people. And so it all looks very much glass half empty or nearly empty. But I'm keen to hear another view from somebody like Tina Puro, who is well respected in this space and has done a lot of work in this space, kept her eyes over it right from the very beginning, and no doubt she will have some really valuable input to add into our discussions and our deliberations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, just digital on what's going on in front of us. The frustration for us has been such a long period of time of having so many unknowns in front of us. I mean, we're still at a point where we've got more questions than answers. We've been in this process so long, we should have a lot more answers than we've got questions, but we seem to be still in the more questions than answers sort of category. If I can add to Councillor Gregory, she said maybe, but I've got if, we think, we want to understand, perhaps, it is unclear, this could mean, we seek clarification. So all those sort of things right through the report are indicating that there's still a table here that needs to understand a lot more, and we're not getting those answers yet. And it's no fault of Yvette's. Yvette's answered quite a lot of them, but really the answers from where this is getting driven need to be delivered to us. I'm grateful for Tai Tuara and the questions they're posing. There's heaps of questions they're posing. So the hope is that some of the answers will come through that. So yeah, so I support that going forward, and I'm just hopeful that we are part of seeing the answers come through that. I'm nervous about how we handle the long-term plan going forward. There was a comment that, oh, it can be amended. I've been through a long-term plan amendment. That's a costly thing to have to do. You know, it's all very well for them to sit down and say, oh, just amend it. Okay, who's going to pay? The ratepayers, of course. You know, so yeah, there's still a lot of water to go under this bridge, and man, I'd just like to get to a place where we get some balance of answers to questions.
Last but not least, Councillor Tupara.
Thank you, Yvette. I know that the mayor and staff are going to run a marathon and half marathon in the next little while, and I get a sense you've run a marathon, and I certainly felt like I'd run a half marathon reading this paper and trying to understand it. It does seem like Councillor Pahuru has said, I can't feel the treaty partnership in this. And pretty much the treaty promised to protect Māori culture and enable Māori to continue to live in New Zealand as Māori. And in fact, this feels like the opposite to that. And particularly when you wind it down to households who are going to have to pay for water and water services, and they have to pay for just being able to live in New Zealand. And they will not be able to pay in our community. And they will forfeit their right to water, which in my view is a basic human right. It was promised under the treaty that we would have access to our resources, just so that we could be Māori. And I think this works against that. I happened the other night to watch Yes Minister replays. And this seems to be the perfect piece of bureaucracy. It reads like a program from Yes Minister. It is so complex and complicated that it's a perfect piece of bureaucracy. Government couldn't have designed this any better. The acronyms need their own dictionary. They couldn't have designed it any better. But it does seem like this new piece of bureaucracy is so massive, it begins to feel like an experiment. And we talked about how experiments that started 30 years ago in Aotearoa is now coming back in a different form. And in 30 years' time from now, somebody else will be in here going, yes, when Papa Nick was in council, they experimented and they went forward with this stuff. It is simply impossible. But for Wellington, it is exactly the world that they like to have. And I feel like I was asked this morning by Councillor Gregory what was my view of the Three Waters stuff. And up to now, I have supported Three Waters because it's a partnership. It's a co-management with iwi. I feel like the iwi are an excuse for a bureaucracy that's been set up to fail them. And I feel some responsibility to articulate that they need to be very, very careful. They need to be able to look at this new legislation and say, I can see ourselves in that. And I'd like to hear from them whether or not they do see that, whether or not those minds see a reflection back to our people, and I certainly don't see it. And I can't feel that I support Three Waters anymore, because I'm beginning to see where the Māori will become an excuse for the failure of this thing. And that is a form of, see, this is going to sound really bad. That is a continuation of the colonial way of thinking that put Māori in this position in the first place. It's almost a complete cycle. And it's based on promise of better things. And it's using the most sacred document of this nation, the treaty, to bring them into that. Our Māori leadership, our Māori academics that have been working on this, our Māori policy makers that have been working on this, I really do need to hear their voice to assure myself that we're doing the right thing here. Because at the end of this, I'm going to have mokopuna to go to turn on the tap, there'll be no water because they haven't paid for it. And they haven't had a capacity to pay for it. And that is a basic human right, to have water for our little ones. And I'm not feeling that they will be in that place. And all my relations that don't even have pipes, no one about the tap. I'm concerned about the pressure and the added economic demise of families that are already struggling. The other day we talked about eggs, the price of an egg. We'll be talking about the price of water. We're talking about gambling and the suffering and the impact that that brings onto families. Now water is starting to feel like an adverse impact on a family, not a benefit, not a quenching of a thirst, but a creation of thirst, a drying up, a evaporation of water. This is what this begins to feel like, because it is so intensely bureaucratic and so deliberately and obviously complex that nobody really understands. And that child turning on the tap because mum couldn't pay the water bill is the one who has to suffer the consequence of it all. I need to be reassured about all this stuff. I want to have that feeling that co-management has stature. And it's not just a tool to further undermine community, particularly here in the State Africa.
Okay, councillors, I can see in everyone's faces that we have, our brains are on fire. So I think it's time for a little break. What I might suggest is that we pass the three papers that we have in front of us, because what we're talking about today is that, yes, please, we do want to submit. There are obvious gaps that you highlighted that you want to supply more information or concerns and queries on behalf of council, on behalf of councillors, but also on behalf of our community. So if there are no issues further that councillors want to discuss, I'll give you a moment soon. I just want to quickly talk through. So the first one would be in regards to the water services legislation bill, and that is instruct our CEO to prepare our submission and include any other effects, and we will make an in-person presentation. The next one is the water services economic regulation. Then we will talk, that is also the same, instruct the CEO to prepare the submission on our behalf. Anything else that we still need to add, and then also myself or someone will make an in-person speak to our submission. And then the last one is our Water Services Entity Act, and that is just noting for us at this stage. Councillor Alder, you had a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've got that workshop on the 15th. I'm all for passing this now. Is it possible to tack on a meaningful meeting on the end of a workshop, that if there's new material comes up that we can pass before the 18th?
So that will be covered in B, saying any other emergent. So it is, and if you look at number 2 of each of those.
And that can be signed off on the 15th.
And then, yeah, so
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
delegated to sign off the final, so we'll include that. I will move this, seconded by Councillor Cranston. All in favour, contrary, carried. Do I need to do it 3 times? Joel, do I need to do it 3 times? Same movers and seconders, we did it as a package. So what we are going to do next is take half an hour. Do we only have the public excluded minutes? So what I will do is move into public excluded and move the minutes. Is there a seconder? Is this, yes, seconded by Councillor